Ladies and gentlemen, recorded in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. It's time for Fight Night Picks with your hosts, Frank and Matt Allen.
Big time card coming up this weekend. We have Jairzinho, Rozenstruik, Biggie Boy taking on Gane, Ciryl, Gane in our main event. And Matt, overall, a great card. One half of your co-hosting duo at Craig Allen FNP over on Twitter and Instagram. You can find Matt at Matt Allen FNP. It's as simple as that on the socials. And as always, Matt, we have Fight Night Picks, question mark kicks on Saturday, 2 hours before the prelims. You can find us at Fight Night Picks over on Instagram. Cast your votes for some of the winners. That's enough talk about this weekend, but really this whole show is about this weekend. We have such an interesting card, Matt. And I look top to bottom. There's so many fights that are exciting. It was really hard to single out fight of the nights, let alone fights to keep our eyes on. What are you thinking about this weekend coming up?
So I'm going to take this time to honestly give you a little bit of praise. And I normally don't do these in the intros, but we often say that one of our favorite things about doing this show is that you get to watch those guys who do fight on the regional scene. And then when they finally make it to the UFC, and they don't just become a fighter in the UFC, they actually make their way up to the top of the division. And they are main eventing shows, and they do look like a title is in their future. Well, that's Ciryl Gane for you. And I mean, you were way earlier on his hype train than I ever was. And he's finally getting that one big opportunity in the UFC. Yes, Jairzinho, he's been there. He's fought some of the top guys in the division, but he's already had his main event chance. This is finally it for Ciryl Gane. Like, he's never had a bigger platform than this one. And hopefully he can just make the most of it, because it is really exciting when these big prospects do finally get their chance in the spotlight. So it's just a really exciting weekend for both guys' career in the main event.
Couple of very dynamic strikers and fighters in that main event. In our co-main event, Nikita Krylov, the minor, taking on Magomed Ankalaev. That's a really fun fight. Two explosive fighters at light heavyweight. Always great to see the heavier weight classes getting some shine. And overall, a great card. I mean, we had a couple of shuffles. You got Pedro, Munhoz, Jimmie, Rivera. We already talked about that one not that long ago.
We've been excited for that fight for about 3 months now.
That's true. Angela Hill's taking on Ashley Yoder. The remix to Ignition. Ashley Yoder looking to draw even in that one. Overall, some fights have been lost on this card. Some fights have been added, and I'm sure that there's going to be more added during the week, because right now, as it sits, we're at about 11 as of the time that we're taping this on Monday night. So keep it locked in throughout the week, because as there's fights added, we are as quick as possible at getting those previews out there. And Matt, let's flip it on over to our Fight of the Night screen, because like I said, there's a lot of great fights on this card.
Oh, yeah.
If you were a big fan of Adele's song Set Fire to the Rain, Nikita Krylov taking on Magomed Ankalaev is one of those fights. I mean, this is such an awesome fight. You look at Nikita Krylov, 27-7, and only 2 fights have gone to decision. Now, if you're looking forward to a busy and explosive Krylov fight, maybe his last 2 weren't the most explosive. I mean, both of those fights were the 2 decisions, but you look at the names. He beat Johnny Walker and absolutely neutralized Walker's game, and then in his fight against Glover Teixeira, it was a split decision loss, and I think, and we'll talk about it more in the prediction, I did think Glover won that fight. I thought he probably even won every round. But Nikita Krylov definitely made it a grinding type of fight. I mean, Glover had him backpack at one point. He had him totally spread out from back mount, and Krylov was able to get out of it. It was such a fun fight if you actually go back and watch it. And for the Ukrainian fighter, this is a guy that when he was outside of the UFC, just after his loss to Misha Cirkunov in 2016, I was thinking, man, they have to sign this guy again. He's made an immediate impact since he's been back with the UFC. And I think he's a guy that a lot of people sleep on just in general, because he's not a huge name. He was really young when he came into the UFC in his first run. Has a knockout win over Walt Harris at heavyweight. How crazy is that? The guy opposite him, though, Magomed Ankalaev, has all the shine. Everybody's excited about him. He's knocked out Iwan Kutsilaba twice in a row. I mean, what is there to say about Magomed Ankalaev? I know he's a huge favorite in this fight, but I just love this because there's such potential in this fight.
I agree 100%. You have 2 finishing machines on your hands, and they can get it done really no matter where the fight takes place. And for Ankalaev, accuracy isn't really something we talk about all that often. We like to bring up the speed, we like to bring up the power and all those other X factors. Ankalaev just has a great way of finding your chin. He throws those with beautiful straight long punches, and for a guy who is his size, he can reach basically across the cage. Not that he's got a Stefan Struve reach by any means, but he can definitely use his reach a whole hell of a lot better than Stefan Struve can. And for a guy like Ankalaev, we've seen him lose. We saw that, of course, Paul Craig Hail Mary submission, but that's been his only blemish on his record. And other than that, he's just run through most of his other competition in the UFC. But Nikita Krylov is by far the most experienced fighter he's ever fought. But also, this is the first time he is fighting, not that Krylov's elite, I would have him just outside that elite category, but he is finally fighting one of those top 15, top 10 worthy fighters. Cutelaba, I think, was ranked for a little while, but let's be honest, he's more of a one-trick pony. Nikita Krylov, it's not like he can only strike, it's not like he can only grapple. He is going to give you a lot of different looks no matter where the fight takes place, and that's what makes this so exciting.
And for Nikita Krylov, too, a guy that's trained at Tiger Muay Thai, American Top Team, so always interesting to see. And for Magomed Ankalaev, again, one of the most accurate, heavy-handed strikers. If you want a perfect example of an Ankalaev fight coming into this one with Krylov, go back and watch his fight against Dalcha Lungiambula if you want to get excited. But I love this one. So much potential for a finish, but maybe it goes a little bit later and it ends up a possible fight of the night. Now, you could consider this as a possible, oh, Canada, we stand on guard for the map, but Alexis Davis has lost 3 fights in a row. She's coming in taking on Sabina Mazo. I definitely consider this a fight of the night because you can be down on the fact that Davis is over 35 fighting in this flyweight division. You can be down on the fact that she's on a losing streak and they're just feeding her to the young up-and-comer. But if you've ever watched an Alexis Davis fight, maybe even the Ronda Rousey fight included because Davis just walked right into her, Alexis Davis is action on wheels in this division. You're going to love it if you go back and watch a lot of Alexis Davis tape, which I did for this one. And Sabina Mazo, I mean, she's really starting to gain that confidence that we wanted to see her have in the UFC, that she had in LFA, that she had on the regional scene. The one loss on her record to Marina Moroz. And we've seen it with a lot of these young fighters where they come in, maybe they don't make an immediate impact in the first fight. You saw it with Joaquin Buckley. You've seen it with a lot of different fighters. Eventually, you're going to lose. For Sabina Mazo, Marina Moroz is a tough first test for anybody. She wasn't able to get the win there, but she's racked off 3 great wins. She beat Shanna Dobson, totally outclassed her. She had a big win over Justine Kisher last time out. And in the middle, a split decision loss to JJ Aldrich. She far outstruck Aldrich. But for Sabina Mazo, you have to think, really at this stage in the game, you're going to have a hard time outstriking her. Can Alexis Davis do that? Can she mix it up with the grappling? I think this leaves a lot of questions out there, but also has the opportunity to be a fight of the night.
I agree, and this is a really fun fight. And to compare it to another fight that we had, I guess, last year, which I guess was a little bit kind of the veteran fighting the prospect, this is this year's Macy Barber versus Roxanne Modafferi. And Sabina Mazo might not have as much hype behind her as Macy Barber did when she first came into the UFC, and I understand. Macy was undefeated, she gets on the mic a lot more. Sabina Mazo is a much better fighter than Macy Barber, and I really do think her ceiling is higher than Barber's, and just so happens, they're both around the same age and in the same weight division. And when you do look at sort of who is the more refined out of the two, because I was just thinking, everyone tries to compare Chris Daukaus and Tom Aspinall. Well, they're 2 young heavyweights, they're built around the same build, they're on their way up the rankings, and everyone wants to see those 2 guys fight, of course. For Mazo, she should be more talked about in this division than she has been. I understand maybe the 3 women on her 3-fight win streak aren't the most impressive, but the way that she has been fighting as of late, especially that Justine Kish fight, we knew Mazo as a primary striker. Now she's showing out how good her grappling is. I think this is a super fun fight, and really just the definition of a crossroads fight. If Davis can win, she proves that she still belongs in the top 10, 15 of the division, and if Mazo can win, she's finally going to get a win over one of those, veterans with a bigger name than just a Shayna Dobson or a Justine Kish.
That's it. This is a huge fight, and for Alexis Davis, too, on that losing streak, we're talking about the number 2 all the way down to the number 7th ranked contenders in this division, and number 2 being Caitlin Chukagian, who has a fight against the number 7 Viviane Araújo. And in the fights Alexis Davis had with Araújo, Maia, and Chukagian, all very close fights. So we'll have to see what happens in this one. It should be a striker's paradise. You definitely don't want to turn your TV off on this one. I have this one circled on my card as a possible fight of the night. Overall, it should be a great card. Like I said, make sure you check out at Fight Night Picks over on Instagram. You can vote for your winners on Saturday. We have question mark kicks 2 hours before the prelims, where we go over all of those votes. We give up our final picks, so maybe we changed our mind during the week. Maybe somebody missed weight. There's those added fights as well. You can check those out there. Make sure you check out the Fight Night Picks store. You can find the new Under Armour shirts. Ooh. I don't have any of the sweaters there, but there's all kinds of great stuff. And if you want sweaters, you let me know down below in the comments section. And if more people buy t-shirts, then we can buy the sweaters, and that's how it works. And then you got to make sure that you check out Manscaped. Head on over to the website. It's manscaped.com. Use promo code FNP. You're going to get 20% off and free shipping on your order today. And as you know, I'm going to talk about my balls a little bit later on. It was tough for me to get that out, but it won't be later. So check it out later on. Manscaped, 20% off with promo code FNP and free shipping at manscaped.com. Matt, as we always say with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it. Really looking forward to the opening fight on our prelims. We have an absolute banger at light heavyweight. Dustin Jacoby taking on Maxim Grishin. And Matt, this is the career resurgence of Dustin Jacoby. We saw him in the UFC, and originally it wasn't a great run. I mean, did he look good against Chris Camozzi? No, he didn't. Did he look good in either of the fights he had? No, he didn't. Went outside of the UFC, had a couple of fights with Bellator. King Mo absolutely destroyed him. John Salter finished him. He got finished by Alex Pereira over with Glory. And that's about the negatives that I can say about Dustin Jacoby. And we'll get to the positives. He's a great striker. You know and love his style. You saw him his last time out against the one and only Justin Ledette. And he was able to get an early first-round finish. The leg kick that chopped him down. The uppercut that finished him. Amazing stuff out of Dustin Jacoby. He's a great striker. Obviously, you wouldn't have the Glory chops if he wasn't a great striker. How's a win over there against UFC middleweight and light heavyweight Carl Roberson? Again, we'll give Dustin Jacoby his flowers, but for Max Grishin coming into this fight, his UFC debut was on short notice, up a weight class against Marcin Tybura. Matt, we're a pro Marcin Tybura podcast.
I definitely am. Your
hard,
loyalties are questioned.
It's hard to look good against Marcin Tybura, and Marcin Tybura looked great in his fight against Max Grishin. But all that aside, Grishin's had a very steady career. Over 40 pro fights, 41 to be exact. Plenty of finish wins on his record. And he's a striker, if anything. Throws a nice low kick. And he's a fighter that, even at 36 years of age, continues to add little wrinkles to his game. You look at the level of competition that he's faced outside of the UFC. Well, he had an unbeaten run with the PFL, including a draw against Jordan Johnson. And oh, by the way, took the O from Jordan Johnson. And listen, maybe you don't like Jordan Johnson, but there's one thing about him. Great wrestler. And he was undefeated against some nice names from the UFC when he went over to the PFL and really gambled on himself. So for Grishin, great striking, good takedown defense, good takedowns in his own right, and pretty slick jiu-jitsu as well. Coming into this fight right now, training out of Extreme Couture in Vegas, because he's actually out of Akmat Fight Club. There's sanctions against them by the US, but we'll just kind of glance over that one. Yikes, not good. But if you look at Grishin, again, plenty of nice wins. His last time out, he was a huge favorite against Jairzinho Antigulov, and he withstood the storm. Like, he went through the bad spots that you don't want to be against Antigulov. He was able to pop back up to his feet. He had some nice moves of his own. He was able to take Antigulov down in his own right. So overall, two very explosive fighters, guys that have plenty of finish wins on their record. What's your take on this fight? And, you know, we talk about possible fight of the nights. We didn't include this in there, but this could be a really good one.
I do agree with you. Stylistically, this makes for a really entertaining matchup because you know you do have primary strikers in there, and it has been nice. It feels like 205 and heavyweight were kind of forgotten about for a little while, especially sort of the last third of last year. But all of a sudden, 2021's been the year of the heavyweight. 3 of our last 4 main events have all been heavyweight, and finally we are going to get some more light heavyweight fights outside of the ranking. And for Maxim Grishin, it's tough. You look at his UFC run. Okay, so you fight Marcin Tybura at heavyweight, and I'm not going to completely steal your point because I'm sure you're going to want to talk about it later, but just to sort of piggyback off what we were talking about before, Grishin does well against wrestlers. And then you look at that Tybura fight, and I get it. Tybura is a very, very good wrestler, but he's also a massive heavyweight as well. He is about as big as a heavyweight can get. So if you combine the fact that, A, he's just a really smothering wrestler with the size advantage, listen, any 205er moving up is probably going to have problems with Marcin Tybura. John Jones himself would have trouble with some of the grappling of Marcin Tybura just because of the relentless pace that he does bring. But that's the issue. I know that you can't beat Marcin Tybura at heavyweight, so you can't beat a ranked heavyweight, who I think is a very good one at that. But you can beat Jairzinho Antigulov, who, yes, he was put in some bad positions by Antigulov, but you have to remember, Antigulov not only looks 50, he is into his 40s, and he's one of those fighters who, he's going to get you in a hard position for that 2-minute stretch.
He's 34.
34, my bad. He looks about 55, and he has the cardio of a 55-year-old. This is my issue with Antigulov. I'm going to bring up the point that I talked about with Dustin and Agapova in last week's video, where the win that Grishin had over Antigulov, it was a lot more the fact that Antigulov just couldn't get up. The ground and pound was phenomenal.
So this is how the fight ended. So put your hands up for a second. This is the end of the fight. No joke. People want to see this. And then the referee stepped in and ended it. Really, it was a questionable stoppage. It was just the fact that Antigulov just stood there with his hands up.
But he was exhausted, and that was the really big problem.
He wasn't too tired yet, but Grishin was just hammering away at the forearms. Some of the punches were getting through, but it was just the accumulation of damage. You can't just stand there and take that much punishment, and that's how Grishin was able to get that second round finish. But you're right. Antigolov's not a top 15 light heavyweight.
Not even close.
And so they give him Dustin Jacoby, and for Dustin Jacoby, same thing. You beat Justin Ledet, not even close to being ranked light heavyweight. The winner of this fight, you have to think, you got to be getting into the 25 to 15, or you're already there. You got to start to move up.
I don't really know, to be completely honest, because here's the problem. Again, Dustin Jacoby, I know you can beat a former heavyweight who doesn't look good at 205 at all. Like, Justin Ledet at 205, he's one of those few fighters who, he went to a new weight class, and it just felt like he was getting out of the one he belonged in the first place. And I think we've seen it, again, I hate to just be recency biased with the fighters who we had last weekend, but look at Tom Aspinall, look at Chris Daukaus. You don't have to be that 250-pound heavyweight to be successful at heavyweight. And Justin Ledet, he did have a frame, again, he's much taller, but he was on the lighter end of the heavyweight scale, and he just decided, okay, I've been out grappled at 205 or at heavyweight. Let's see if I can go at 205. Personally, I just felt like we never got the best version of Justin Ledet at 205. Dustin Jacoby lit him on fire, though. That fight was not competitive, and the leg kicks that he showed were nice because, again, the weird thing with Dustin Jacoby is he needs space, but he's not afraid to throw those kind of Justin Gaethje leg kicks, if you will. He can go chest to chest and throw that really chopping leg kick, and he's good at going to the calf and to the thigh. The thing that worries me, though, is he'll just spam them. If he does have success with the leg kick, he's not afraid to just keep on going back to the well over and over and over again. And if you are Max Grishin, it's not like he's going to be able to carry him with a straight shot every single time. But if Dustin Jacoby does fall in love with the leg kick, and if it is landing, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Because yes, Grishin, he's going to start feeling those effects, especially as that fight wears on. But he is a fairly good striker, and he is heavy-handed. So if he can throw a straight shot down the middle and catch Jacoby, I'm not saying he can't put him down, but it's definitely going to be an interesting part of the fight. And also for Dustin Jacoby, last point for me, rival of Simon Marcus in Glory Kickboxing. Simon Marcus fought, I'd say friend of the show, even though we've never met him, but it feels like we talk about him enough that he should be a friend of the show. Stitch him up, Joe Schilling. So weird connection there over in Glory.
Stitch him up. I told the guy to go back and watch Will Morris's fight with Joe Schilling this morning. So if you haven't watched it, go back after you watch this. But again, if you look at this fight, Dustin Jacoby has good side-to-side movement. He switches stances, but when he switches, he normally doesn't throw a whole lot. It's just to kind of give a different look, but he really just does it quick for about 3-4 seconds, and then he moves back.
It's a good point, too, because his right side is very power-heavy, and it is weird that you bring that up, because a lot of fighters, Wonder Boy is a good example, where he does fight different based on which stance he is, but that's a good point that you bring up about Jacoby. He'll switch stances, and he might throw a single shot, but that is it. It really is more of a different look for his opponent than it is an offensive tool that he
throws
uses.
Really, really good low kicks. I like that you bring that up, but what I really like about this is I actually don't like it. For Dustin Jacoby, really susceptible to getting hit, and when he gets hit, he turns red and he starts to swell. And there's another fighter on this card that we're going to talk about that as soon as you apply a single ounce of pressure against them, their face swells like Nate Diaz. I don't know if you can tell who that's going to be, but there is somebody. So for Dustin Jacoby, he did get marked up and he did get hit by Ledet, even in that one round. They were exchanging. For Max Grishin, you talk about the leg kicks, throws really good leg kicks. The other thing that Grishin does that Jacoby doesn't, Grishin stands there and throws a lot of feints and throws a lot of weird reads and moves his level quite a bit. So you might get a hard read or a hard opportunity to kind of hit Max Grishin, but he doesn't throw a ton of volume. That might give Dustin Jacoby a really good opportunity.
I was going to say, because for a second you were giving Max Grishin like he's an Israel Adesanya level striker.
Oh, no.
He can get out volumed, and again, this fight's going to come down to who's moving forward. If Grishin gets his back up against the cage, here's one thing I don't like about Grishin. He stands very tall, and what you bring up is a valid point. He's good at using his head movement in the middle of the cage, but when he gets backed up, and again, it's a trouble for a lot of fighters, but his height is such a big disadvantage. When he gets backed up to the cage, his chin is very high in the air, and for Dustin Jacoby, he's great at going body shots and then up to the head. It's just a great kickboxing combination. I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know, but he will chop to the leg, go to the body, and then bring it up top. And if Grishin does start to get worried about the leg kicks, about the body shots, and if his hands come down at all, I wouldn't be surprised for Dustin Jacoby to land a big shot over the top.
Matt, so in terms of the odds on this one, Dustin Jacoby open a -210 favorite. He's now -180 or thereabouts, best fight odds. And if you look at Grishin, open a +180, he's now in a +149. So the odds are starting to trend down. A little bit of money coming in on Grishin. This is where I always like to parry the odds with the early votes on Tapology, just to see where the fans and the gamblers are thinking, maybe alike, maybe not. 724 total votes, 61% on Grishin. 48% have him to win by knockout, the other 42% by decision. So the fans are going with Grishin. The money's on Jacoby early, but it's starting to come in on Grishin. What are your thoughts here?
So I can admit, you know Grishin's game a lot better than I do. You focused on his career in the PFL more than I did. I've said this on the show multiple times. I will watch the odd PFL event, but I'm not as dedicated to it as I know that you are. I'm going to pick Dustin Jacoby in this fight. And again, if Grishin really wows me, then finally, this is the performance that says, yes, maybe he is ready for those top 20, top 15 guys. But I think he does need to beat Dustin Jacoby in an impressive fashion for me to finally say that. Because even right now, when you look at 205, it is one of the more shallow divisions, but you still do have the guys like OSP. He's not even ranked right now. You do have the Johnny Walkers out there. Guys who, on their best day, they are really, really good fighters, and on their worst day, they're going to get beat by a lot of unranked guys. And eventually, for Grishin or for Dustin Jacoby, they are going to have to fight one of those really volatile fighters outside the top 15. So I'm going to pick Jacoby personally. I think Grishin might have the higher ceiling overall, but I do think Jacoby's going to get it done this weekend.
Max Grishin hasn't lost a fight since October 2016. It was a 4th round knockout to Magomed and Ankalaev. And it's crazy to think we're still on the same card here, and all these fights later. I mean, he has the loss to Tabora, but sorry, that one's up a weight class at heavyweight. The draw against Jordan Johnson, a draw against Smolino Rama over with the PFL, and other than that, 1, 2, 3, 4 wins over there, and he looked great. But it's weird. He has a lot of success against wrestlers. Against strikers, it's kind of like a mixed bag. You have the fight against Ankalaev, you have your other fights. So I really do think if Max Grishin can push a pace, he can implement some of his wrestling, if he can keep his output, he can really just kind of wear on Dustin Jacoby, and that would be a great path to victory. Jacoby in tight also has an advantage. I think in the clinch, again, you saw the position where he already had poor Justin Ledet hurt, but he has great opportunities to victory here. I will slightly side with the Russian in this fight. I'm going to go with Max Grishin here. I think especially training out of a camp like Extreme Couture to get ready for this one, I think you're going to try and implement some more of that wrestling. As long as he doesn't get caught with something coming in, I think he has a really good opportunity here. So I'm going to go with Max Grishin. You're going to go with Dustin Jacoby.
I'm excited for this, though.
We're going to see who's hoisting the trophy at the end of the weekend, but overall, it's a great fight. It's a great card headlined by... Well, really 4. It's like 2 main events. You get Ankalaev and Krylov. You have Jairzinho, Rozenstruik taking on Ciryl, Gane. Should be a great one. Really looking forward to it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. Real exciting matchup at bantamweight, Matt. We have the anomaly, Vince Cachero, looking to get a win in his second time out with the UFC, and the UFC debut of the Heat, Ronnie Lawrence. And for Ronnie Lawrence... well, the guy was just born with a country music nickname. If you mix Brooks and Dunn and Tracy Lawrence, you'd end up with songs like These Sticks and Stones Made My Hillbilly Deluxe, or, and I'm gonna sing it, Matt, Ma Maria, Paint Me a Birmingham. I mean, Tracy Lawrence has one of the most unique voices in country music. However, Ronnie Lawrence brings it. And if you look at his last 3 fights, they're not the same as his first few fights. This guy started his amateur career back in 2010, which is crazy to believe because you look at the last loss, he fought Steve Garcia, who's now in the UFC. That was back with Bellator. He took a lot of time off between that fight and his next fight. He's won 3 in a row. His second to last fight with LFA, a very impressive performance. If you go back and watch that one against Garrett Arnfield, I mean, he's throwing heat. When he needs to get the takedown, he does. And then if you go back and watch his appearance on Dana White's Contender Series against Jose Johnson, that was one of those fights where Johnson was a huge favorite. Ronnie Lawrence was in around a plus 200 or more of an underdog.
And we know how Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series is set up. Like, they do not normally want the underdogs to win.
No, so underdog Lawrence goes in there, and from the hop, they're talking about Johnson. He's a knockout artist. He's super long for the division. It's like... I don't know, it's like looking at like a Cole Miller or an O'Day Osborne. Like, the guy's super long, but he has the opportunity to knock you out. Will choke. So Johnson goes in there, and Ronnie Lawrence just hooks up with him. He goes for the underhooks, body lock, takes him down. Like, Steve Bond's the guy to be into it, hook him up. So you had a guy hooking him up. Ronnie Lawrence, great takedowns. He had 12 total takedowns in that fight. Wasn't able to keep Johnson totally down, but every time that Johnson popped back up, he took him back down. Looked amazing in that fight. I saw a few 30-26 scorecards in the mixes. It seemed like the commentary team thought there could be even more 10-8s, but for me, 30-27, really good fight. So he comes in here, and who do you match him up with? Like, you got a guy that's 6-1 in his career. You don't really know who to give him to. You take Vince Cachero, a guy that's, well, 0-1 in the UFC, 1-3 in his last 4, 2-3 in his last 5. Like, it's not a good look, but for Vince Cachero, if you go back and watch his fights, a ton of pressure. He likes to fight in a phone booth. Might not have the heaviest hands, but he always puts on a good performance and has pretty good takedown defense. And if you watch his last fight, he came in on 2 days' notice against Jamal Emmers, and he pushed a pace. Emmers just kind of moved out of the way. He'd land some long jabs. They look like a weight class or 2 apart. And Emmers was able to pop in with, just jump knees, flying knees up the middle, really kind of control it. But Vince Cachero threw a lot of good volume in that fight. So when I looked at it, we've had a lot of fighters recently. Gabe Green was one of those fighters. When he fought Daniel Rodriguez, we talked about it recently. Gabe Green looked good enough in a loss where he lost 30-27 by every judge's account, but his volume was really good. Vince Cachero's volume was good in his fight with Jamal Emmers. I like what I saw there. But again, if you look at Ronnie Lawrence, a lot more power and a lot more takedown ability from Vince Cachero, a lot more volume, and he likes to push a pace. So I think this has the opportunity to be a very interesting fight, and I'd like to get your thoughts on it.
No, I agree 100%. This is going to be an entertaining fight pretty much no matter what. Like, we were tempted to throw it up on the Fight of the Night screen, a little bit behind baseball, as Craig would say. And it's just stylistically, these guys are going to make for a very fun fight. And yeah, you might look at Vince Cachero's record and you're like, really? He's 1-3 in his last 4? But again, you really have to understand, he gets knocked out by Casey Kenny. Insider information, there's a very good chance Dominic Cruz gets knocked out by Casey Kenny within a month.
If you go back and watch that fight, like, Cachero's putting it on him, they get in close, and you can see that, Casey Kenny's landing hot and heavy from the southpaw stance. But as soon as Cachero gets in there, tie clinch, knee up the middle, Cachero's out cold.
Exactly. But I think we can both agree, there is no shame losing to a guy like Casey Kenny. Say what he will on podcasts or whatnot.
That punched Casey Kenny's ticket to the UFC.
Exactly. So that just tells you how good Vince Cachero is. And in his last fight against Emmers, even Emmers was kind of a victim of this, where he loses his UFC debut against Giga Chikadze, and everyone's like, oh, well, was he ever that good to begin with? And then we kind of see the run that he's been able to go on ever since. I'm not saying Vince Cachero's in that category where it's like, okay, maybe in the future he will be in the top 15, but I don't think that there's any shame doing better than expected on your UFC debut on short notice, especially against a very experienced opponent like a Jamal Emmers. The problem is, Ronnie Lawrence just seems to have the counter to a lot of what Cachero does well. When you talk about the pressure, when you do talk about some of the volume, he's going to have to stand in the pocket against Ronnie throughout this fight, and Ronnie's going to be able to land power. And the thing, too, is at distance, Ronnie Lawrence throws a spinning back kick just like old Dennis Seaver did, to call out Dennis Seaver. Not a name I thought I'd be referencing today, but he doesn't spam it nearly as bad as Dennis Seaver did, and I'm sure Dennis Seaver was on a whole concoction of different things that allowed him to throw that kick very hard. But it is a very good technique of Lawrence's, and it is kind of Max Holloway-esque, where he won't throw it, and then all of a sudden, like the third round, you're like, damn, getting hit by a spinning back kick. It's just, there's a certain variety in his techniques that I don't think Vince has. But all in all, I do think this is a really fun fight. And I can be honest, I don't really see either guy finishing the other one in this fight. And I think that's what should make it a candidate for Fight of the Night. It's just going to be a good back and forth fight between two guys who have great cardio, great output, and I couldn't be more excited.
It should be a great card, Matt. Or a great fight, rather. It should be a great card, too. If we have a look at the odds, though, Ronnie Lawrence open to -140. He's now -162. For Vince Cachero, open to +120. He's now +134. And if we look over on Tapology, 779 total votes, 88% going with Lawrence, 87% by decision. And again, if you look back at his last fight, he went 12 of 17 for the takedowns. And you don't see a lot of those takedowns, like the upper body throws from, outside of the two black lines, so to speak. You don't see a lot of them landing.
Really don't.
Ronnie Lawrence just again and again and again. 10 minutes and 5 seconds of control time in that fight, too.
He fought like Clay Guida a little bit.
You look at Ronnie Lawrence's last fight, you look at Vince Cachero, you look at these guys in general, and you understand, these are guys that, under normal circumstances, probably a couple more fights with the LFAs of the world, CFFCs, CSs, and you end up in the UFC with some impressive performances. But for Ronnie Lawrence, Dana White thought he was incredibly impressive on Contender Series, especially enough so to offer him a contract, where we've seen some fighters recently who've had fights like Ronnie Lawrence did. Brendan Loughnane had a pretty good one, and they decided not to sign him. So great for Ronnie Lawrence. In this one, it's tricky because, again, Lawrence has the keys. He's got the power. He throws those kicks. He gets hit, and he can leave his hands down a little bit. Now, I know he trains out of Sanford MMA with some of the best in the business. I'm sure that he's kind of worked on some of those holes, and it's a guy that he's had a lot of time off between his fights, so you can definitely gain in the martial arts. For Vince Cachero, I think it's only up from a fight against Jamal Emmers, up a weight class. So I think it's tighter than maybe the odds and the fans have it, and I'm actually taking Vince Cachero.
Really?
I really like, again, I like the defensive wrestling. I like the output. And it's one of those fights where, to me, it's, and this is going to be a terrible comparison, but for me, Vince Cachero has the output, he has the defensive wrestling chops, and he can pressure. Yana Kunitskaya had a fight last weekend against Ketlin Vieira where
True.
if you're just doing something, you can get a win like that. I like the technique out of him. But if anybody got a finish in this fight, I think Ronnie Lawrence would be able to. It's just if Lawrence gets Cachero down, I think he's got to do something with it. And I think Cachero's going to be the one popping back up or at least trying to work for something. So I like Cachero in this fight. And it might seem crazy, but that's what I'm going with here.
So I kind of agree with the breakdown, but here's the thing. The pressure of Vince Cachero is going to push him into the takedown attempts of Ronnie Lawrence. And even if Lawrence, let's say if he can't get that takedown in open space, if you're moving towards me, it's going to give me more of an opportunity to shoot that takedown. And for Cachero, it's kind of a double-edged sword, again, because he's going to need pressure and volume to win this fight. But the more he's moving forward, the more susceptible to the takedown attempt he's going to be. So it does come down to, really, who gets tired first? If Cachero does start to tire in that first round, let's say he is giving up some space. He's defending takedowns. He's the one on the receiving end of a lot of the damage. Well, just going to get worse for him. Lawrence can have that really high output, and I think that's important to mention too. He didn't just take down Jose Johnson a ton of times. He was able to take him down. I understand he popped back up to his feet, but he was just like a dog on the bone. He never let him just get the space he needed to strike on the outside. He was really dedicated to his game plan. I don't know the last time we've ever disagreed on the first two picks, but I'm going to ever so slightly pick Ronnie Lawrence, even though I do agree with you. I think the odds should be much closer, and I don't agree that 88% of people on Tapology are picking Lawrence to win this.
The crazy thing, too, for Cachero, if you want to throw another one his way, if you look at the fight against Emmers in terms of strikes, this is where it gets really weird. Significant strikes went the way of Emmers, and I got the numbers up here in front of me. Let's read them off. 103 to 76 for Emmers, but total strikes 121 to 113 for Cachero. So if he can keep busy, if he can push a pace, you never know what could happen. We're disagreeing on the pick. You've got Ronnie Lawrence. I've got Vince Cachero. I'm really looking forward to this fight. Apparently we saw something different in our analysis, but it should be a great fight and a great card. You've got Jairzinho, Rozenstruik taking on Ciryl Gane in the main event. Let's keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. Very interesting and explosive fight at light heavyweight. We have Alonzo Menifield taking on the Nightmare, William Knight. Matt, for William Knight, he was one of those guys like a Greg Hardy, like a Chase Hooper. He had a developmental deal to come into the UFC. He was such a big deal on the regional scene. I remember when he was coming up and everybody figured this is a guy that's going to end up in the UFC. So he goes back to CS. He was even kind of like the guest an analyst that they would have on some of their programming. I remember going back, watching some fights to try and get ready for some of these cards and doing out my notes. There's William Knight on the mic, and it was kind of interesting. So he goes into a big-time fight with Tafon Chukwe, who we now know is insanely powerful.
He's all right.
And very, very talented, and he gets finished in that fight. And it was a weird back and forth. It was a good fight. If you want to go back and watch a good fight, that's a one, especially if you're a big Tafon Chukwe fan or a Lloyd Irvin fan. But go back and watch that one. For Knight, loses that fight and then comes back very quickly and picks up a knockout win over Rocky Edwards, which is impressive. It's a name that a lot of people know. Then he comes on to Contender Series and he finishes Cody Brundage. Then he comes out like 2 weeks after that and he fights a really interesting prospect in Alexis Cameron in a fight that a lot of people figured it's going to be a knockout, it's going to end very, very quickly, and he beats Alexis Cameron by decision. And for William Knight, not having the full training camp, not having all that time to think, well, geez, this guy's a strong style guy, he trains with Stipe Miocic, he's a main training partner, and a great striker. He goes in there, and I don't like this, and this is where I'm going with it. He keeps his head up, his hands down, and walks forward. He didn't need a ton of shots, and especially at the end of the first round, he almost had Cameron rocked. But he worked the clinch. He worked the takedown. He really wore on Alexis Cameron to the point where he just wore and get into great positions. He would get into mount. He would really work his entire game plan. And to me, it was kind of the evolution of William Knight. Oh, this guy isn't the fighter that we thought he was. He isn't just the knockout artist. He can do a lot of things that maybe we wouldn't have seen before if he had a full camp for Alexis Cameron. For Alonzo Menifield, well, really, William Knight's just the Alonzo Menifield that we thought we were going to get. Because for Alonzo Menifield, he came in and had the win on Contender Series. He beat Deshaun Boatwright, who was 3-0. Then he fought a really tough out in Vinicius Morea.
Don't know if that's a tough out.
Knocked him out cold, and then he fought Paul Craig. And Paul Craig, I mean, listen, you might not like him, you might love him, but Paul Craig shouldn't be throwing spinning kicks to the body against Alonzo Menifield. Menifield ducked in, knocked him out. Then he fought Devin Clark, and Devin Clark wore on him and won a pretty one-sided decision. Good fight for Devin Clark. Smart fight for Devin Clark. So then Alonzo Menifield comes out and fights Vince St. Preux. And I know, and I'll kind of let you take it from here, because it was a classic OSP fight.
Was it ever?
Where he didn't take down Menifield. They kind of stared at each other. Menifield did the old duck away from power, and then he would try to land his own shots. You saw OSP landed straight down the pipe, and it just kept touching him with that jab. And then finally, lunge, knocked him out. And that was pretty much it. Sorry.
I mean, yeah, that's how the fight went. This fight's weird. I gotta be honest. Here's the thing. William Knight and Alonzo Menifield will never be champions. And it's unfortunate to say, but you bring up Alexa Camor, and I gotta be honest. Alexa Camor is like Jacob Malkoun. The only reason people know who he is because of who he's training with. It's not because of how good he really is. I think William Knight looked good against him, don't get me wrong. But the fact that that's his biggest win doesn't prove to me that he's going to be Alonzo Menifield. And here's the thing. Alonzo Menifield's best win, like you said, is against Paul Craig. But even that fight was kind of weird. And not that Alonzo Menifield's as odd as a fighter as OSP, because OSP, his fights make zero sense at all. But even look at the OSP fight. Menifield comes in, he starts out, he's doing well, he's pressuring Ovince St. Preux, and then Ovince St. Preux, like you had mentioned, very Uriah Hall-esque, just keeps on putting out the jab, and every single time OSP threw pretty much anything, it would land on Menifield, because Menifield has this weird thing where he does pressure his opponent, but he's not fast enough to get out of the way of their counter shots. He won't be able to have that fast switch where it's okay, I'm going to stalk my opponent, and then I can actually flitch between my sort of defensive settings and my offensive settings. Menifield does stand there just to get hit, and that's a really big issue when you are fighting at really any weight class, but especially at 205, when you do expect to fight the OSPs of the world, when you are going to fight the William Knights of the world. Like, here's another great example. Jamal Hill, who does not have very much experience, was able to go out there and put away a guy like OSP. He was able to really download his game plan, figure out what worked and what didn't work, and we saw what an upper-level prospect can do to someone like OSP. Alonzo Menifield had a very similar beginning to the fight like Jamal Hill did. The difference was he couldn't make the adjustments, and that's the problem with Menifield. He doesn't make adjustments mid-fight, and that's a big problem. And William Knight, it's the thing. He can go out there and just strike. He can be the big power guy, but he can go in there and clinch. And if you're Menifield and you're not expecting a clinch-heavy game plan from William Knight, you might just get sapped of all your energy early on. And we've seen Alonzo Menifield fatigue in fights. This is not going to be a fight where, oh wow, Menifield's going to come in with phenomenal cardio.
This is such a weird fight because, again, Alonzo Menifield comes from the much more credentialed gym. He's a Fortis MMA guy. So as far as in-fight adjustments, one of the best gyms in the world for that. Some of the best cornering. We've seen Saif Saud in his corner in the past, and really he hasn't had to have much in terms of in-fight game planning because, again, first round finish. It's been 7 first-round finishes. You look at one of the big wins, Kadzimierad Bestayev, a guy that's 10-4 now. You look at the guy or the names that guy's fought, and again, his last loss was on Contender Series in 2020 against Phil Hawes. But Alonzo Menifield's beaten some decent fighters, and he's beaten the guys you would want a big prospect to beat. Mohea, Paul Craig, and then he's matched up with Trevor Smith, again, Devin Clark, and OSP. So it's kind of tricky. Like, where is Alonzo Menifield? It's going to be the measuring stick fight for William Knight as well. And if you look at his record, again, a lot of first-round finishes as well. He has the one finish over Herdem Alexis in the third round. But other than that, first round, Rocky Edwards third round, and then the decision is last time out. I like that decision. I know that tips my hand a little bit, but I do like that. I like that added wrinkle to his game because, again, they're both strikers, so who's got more? Who can show me more? Anybody can knock anybody out. You saw that last weekend, Curtis Blades, Derek Lewis. I mean, listen, I'm still getting the mentions of how could you guys not see that? Well, it was one or the other, and one of them happened. So if we look at the odds in this one, Matt, Menifield open to plus 115. He's now at a minus 112. If you look at William Knight, open to minus 135, now at a plus 111. Or sorry, minus 111. So they're basically, the odds are at par. If you look over at the votes on Tapology, they're fairly close, but you might be surprised. 834 total votes, 68% with William Knight, 73% by knockout. For the 32% that have Menifield, 76 by knockout. So, good chance there's going to be a finish, but there was a good chance that the Cameron fight was probably going to end in a finish too. Two primary strikers. I'm going with William Knight. I'm not offering up a method of victory. I'm a Fight Night picks guy. I'm not a DraftKings guy or the gambling guy. I'm going with William Knight in this fight. What are you thinking here?
It's a very 50-50 fight if we are being honest, because again, the guys who Alonzo Menifield has lost to, I would put them ahead of William Knight in the rankings. But again, he does have that weird win over Paul Craig where Paul Craig right now, I'm pretty sure is in the top 15. He might even be top 12 right now. But the Paul Craig fight, is that an outlier? Or on Alonzo Menifield's day, are those the types of people he can beat?
It's an outlier.
I think you are right, and that's exactly what I was going to say. I have been back and forth on this fight, but I do think William Knight, I like what you had mentioned, I do think he just has the variety. If Alonzo Menifield gets in trouble, he can panic wrestle, but it's just going to fatigue him even worse. If William Knight gets in trouble, he can always push Menifield up against the cage. He can employ a bit more of a grindier style, if you will, and I just think he's going to be able to outlast Menifield. And really, if there's going to be a finish, I wouldn't be surprised if William Knight can get the finish later on in the fight.
Two more things just to look out for before we get away from this one is the fact that William Knight, again, keeps his head up high, can keep his hands low, and moves forward. Alonzo Menifield, much more fleet of foot, moves side to side very well. He will duck into things, which, again, can get him cracked.
Get tired.
For William Knight, too, he throws a nice kick, but he does the thing of thigh, knee, and calf. You don't have to worry about it in this fight against Menifield. Again, two primary strikers, so just things to look out for. But again, I've got Knight in this one.
As do I.
Matt's got Knight in this one. We're really looking forward to this fight, and this card overall headlined by Biggie Boy, Jairzinho Rozenstruik taking on Bon Gamin, Ciryl Gane. It should be a great fight. Awesome card. Keep locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say.
Let's get into it.
Very interesting fight. At women's flyweight, we have the former bantamweight title challenger, Canadian from Port Colborne, Ontario, Alexis Davis, the alligator, yikes, taking on the Colombian queen, Sabina Mazo. Matt, Sabina Mazo was one of those prospects that when we started Fight Night Picks 2018, I was so excited about her making a progression, coming into the UFC. The big win that kind of won me over with Sabina Mazo was back on the regional scene. Her first fight against Alejandra Lara that we've seen challenge for the belt with Bellator. She's a great fighter in her own right, and she was 4-0 when she took on Mazo. Mazo able to get the win there. She had the knockout wins over with LFA. She comes into the UFC, and you might have been disappointed with the debut, but let me tell you this. If you're a fighter from Ukraine, like Nikita Krylov, like Marina Moroz, there's rarely ever an easy fight against the Ukrainians in the UFC. Marina Moroz, a great example of that. A lot of pressure, a ton of volume. That's the Marina Moroz staple.
Not a lot of landing, but
not a lot of landing, a lot of pressure. Kind of like Caitlin Chikagian until recently. But if you look at Sabina Mazo, she loses that fight, and what does she do? Well, she comes right back and learns from it. She comes back 6 months later, beats Shanna Dobson, beats JJ Aldrich, beats Justine Kitch, and finishes Kitch, who was a pretty good fighter on the ground. Like, that was the impressive thing.
This is the thing. Justine Kish once pooped herself in the middle of the cage because she didn't want to tap her rear naked choke. Sabina Mazo beat her by rear naked choke. So that just tells you, like, the squeeze that Mazo must have on her, I guess. Sorry, I'll give it back to you. My bad.
Like a tube of toothpaste. So, if you look at Sabina Mazo's career, plenty of finishes, very impressive striker, though. And that's the thing. You look at the UFC stats, and we hate to do it, but you look at the strike differential that she has, and it's absolutely insane.
She fought Shanna Dobson.
You'll see that pop up throughout our videos, but that's one of those ones where you just look at it and go, holy smokes, like, that's incredible. For Alexis Davis, though, she's been doing the damn thing since 2007, lost to Sarah Kaufman. Well, then she had to fight Sarah Kaufman again. She lost it, and then she fought her third time, and she beat her. So third time was the charm. But you look at the losses, Matt. Kaufman, La Rosa, Shayna Baszler, Elena Maxwell, Sarah Kaufman, Ronda Rousey for the title, and then again, McMahon, Chikagian Maya Araujo. She's fought some of the best fighters for the longest time. And
she has a TKO win over Amanda Nunes.
TKO win over Amanda Nunes with Strikeforce way back. That was coming into the UFC back in 2011. She's beaten Dr. Rosie Sexton, Liz Carmouche 2 times, and then Jessica Ai to get the title shot. I'm going to talk later on about Alexis Davis's losing streak, but overall, what does she mean to MMA? Not just women's MMA, MMA, and Canadian MMA in general.
So I am going to sort of tie this into a little bit of my analysis of Alexis Davis, but really, she's one of the pioneers of it. And when you do think of that sort of initial breed of women's MMA fighters who join the UFC, the first fighters who always come to mind are the Sarah McMahons, the Ronda Rouseys, the Miesha Tates, and honestly, Alexis Davis is right up there with them. Like, she was... I guess she was Ronda Rousey's second official title defense, or third, I guess, after Miesha Tate, but she was one of the first, and she's been around really since the inception of women's MMA in the UFC. And unfortunately, that's kind of the detriment of being around for so long. Like, Alexis Davis at this point in her career is 19-10, and she's really fought everyone there is to fight in women's MMA across multiple divisions. She's fought 4 belts, she's fought on prelims, she's done really everything. And when you think about Alexis Davis, all my memories of Alexis Davis, they are of those, earlier UFC days, back in 2013, back in 2015 even. I don't really think of Alexis Davis being that fighter from kind of the 2016, 17, 18 era. And I understand she hasn't been able to stay overly active, especially in this sort of, I'll say the latter half of her career, especially over the losing streak. But this is the definition of a crossroads fight. We have Sabina Mazo, a fighter who you had said we've been high on since 2018. Like, we've had a spotlight on Mazo for a minute now, and it is nice to see her sort of realize some of her potential from early on. But she's finally fighting the hardest fight of her life. And listen, maybe Alexis Davis isn't prime Alexis Davis anymore, but I know what I'm going to get from her. She's got great defensive wrestling. She's good on the ground. She's offering... The commentary is going to talk a lot about her Muay Thai, and they're going to make it sound like Alexis Davis has some murderous Muay Thai. She has good technique. I wouldn't really say there's a lot of power behind her shots, but she's got great forward pressure. She's got good volume, and fighting Alexis Davis means that you're going to learn something about yourself. If you have bad takedown defense, she's going to take you down. If you're a bad striker, she's going to hit you. No matter what you do well, unless you really are just a perfect, well-rounded fighter, Alexis Davis is going to find something to exploit, and I think that's what makes this fight so much fun. The thing that worries me, though, is has the sport just passed Alexis Davis by?
You want a really weird comp on this fight? Some people might disagree with it. Jorge Masvidal, when he fought Nate Diaz. If you look at Alexis Davis, she marches forward, and the thing about her is she's just like that Red Hot Chili Pepper song. And Anthony Kiedis, if you're at home watching this, scar tissue that I wish you saw, and that's where I'm just going to stop it. But if you watch Alexis Davis' fights, in the first round, she turns red, she starts to blow up, she can get cut like the fight against Caitlin Chookagian. But this is the weird thing. When she fought Chookagian, Alexis Davis was ranked 3rd in the division. She had beaten Liz Carmouche, her only fights at flyweight. Carmouche, the second fight, and then Chookagian, Maia Araujo. Right now, Chookagian's your 2nd-ranked flyweight. Then you have Jennifer Maia, who's ranked 4th, and then you have Viviane Araujo, who's ranked 7th. Araujo has a fight against Chookagian coming up. So then I went back and I watched those fights start to finish. They're all decision losses for Alexis Davis. In the fight against Caitlin Chookagian, she loses 29-28, 30-27, 29-28. Majority of MMA decisions voters had it 29-28, the loss, and going to Chookagian. Alexis Davis had a lot of success in that fight, and to me, she won the 2nd round. So then I look at her next fight. She fights Viviane Araujo. 3 judges scored it 29-28. If you look at the MMA decisions, again, a lot of 29-28s. Alexis Davis won the 2nd round. And then you look at her next fight when she takes on Jennifer Maia. Maia was in the middle. Same thing. She won the 2nd round. Alexis Davis is always in these fights against very high-level fighters. 2018, 2019, 2019. She didn't fight in 2020. She's based out of California, so a little surprised that we didn't see her in 2020. It's not like, she was coming up to Canada and vice versa. Maybe she was. I don't know. But she's been based in the States for a really long time. She's been competitive against the highest level of these women. And when she's fighting Chookagian, she's pressing forward. Chookagian's moving side to side, pumping the jab, huffing and puffing, and maybe not landing a lot. Great volume from Davis in that fight. Great volume against Maia. She actually had more volume and more top pressure than Maia did in that fight. And same thing against Araujo, to the point where Araujo was slowing down even after the first round. Now, yes, Joe Rogan focused on it way too much.
She also always does.
But she slowed down big time. Davis had the 2nd. 3rd round was close. I'm not going to make the argument, but those fights were very, very close for Davis. So in this fight where I make the comparison between Masvidal and Diaz, can Mazo stay and stick and move and work the outside and really work the pressure? And she has the power too. Can she really cut up Alexis Davis to the point where she's able to get the win? Or can Davis close that gap, fight in a phone booth like she likes to, and maybe even take it down to the ground where she's going to have a big advantage? If you like Alexis Davis in this fight, I wouldn't say you're wrong. Like, there's a lot of things that these women both bring into this fight. I love it.
I think, yeah, it is a super fun fight. Now, here's the only issue when you do bring up that losing streak, and I do agree with you, and it's not even something I can argue. Those are 3 of the better fighters in the division. The problem is, Sabina Mazo can fight basically the same as Caitlin Chookagian. I understand the wrestling threat's not there from Mazo, but really up until the last couple Chookagian fights, we never knew that it was a tool in her box either. Jennifer Maia, she's a much better wrestler. She's got great talk control. And then in her last fight, yeah, she didn't look great. But here's the thing. Mazo can fight on her bike. She can use that, I'm just going to use my jab. I'll throw in a straight every now and then. And I can just throw in my kicks here and there. I do like what you said, though. If you like Alexis Davis even a little bit in this fight, it's probably not a bad idea to throw a couple bucks on her. Because Alexis Davis, at the best version of what she's going to do, she's going to smother Mazo throughout the entirety of this fight. And Mazo had the Marina Moroz wake-up effect in her UFC debut, if you will, where, okay, you finally see what it's like to fight one of those fighters who, they kind of know how to fight for the judges, if you will. You know, it's hard to hit Moroz. You're going to get frustrated. She has a very high output. And losing to her, listen, losing to Moroz in your UFC debut is probably a good thing for you overall. You're going to learn a lot about yourself, and you're going to get better. And I think we have seen a better version of Sabina since that fight. Alexis Davis, she's going to bring you, I'm just going to hold you up against the cage for 15 minutes, and you have to break that separation. And for Mazo, she's not the most physically strong fighter at this weight class. She is very big frame-wise for the weight class, but she is always going to have trouble with the more physically powerful women in the division. And I would say Alexis Davis still is in that category, even though she's a little bit later on in her career. I think this is a really fun fight. For my prediction, this is going to be one of those ones where I'd probably monitor until question mark kicks, if I'm being honest. Like, right now, I think Mazo is probably going to win. It's easy to pick the younger fighter. They can stay on their bike. I know how much Alexis Davis marks up, like you had mentioned. But honestly, come Saturday, I wouldn't be surprised if I switched my pick and just say Alexis Davis by smothering decision.
It is a tricky one, and it's like going to the Chattahoochee. You learn a lot about living and a little about love. And in this one, can Sabina Mazo kind of withstand Alexis Davis? Because if you beat Davis, who is ranked right now, there's going to be a number next to Sabina Mazo's name. It's kind of a surprise that there isn't.
I guess you saying that too, I might as well ask you this question. Could it be a good thing for Mazo to lose this fight?
I think it could, because again, you go back to King's MMA and now you know exactly what you have to work on. Maybe it's the volume of Davis. Maybe it's the wrestling. So we'll keep an eye on that. The odds, though, plus 205 for Davis at open. She's now plus 188 underdog. For Mazo, open to minus 240, now to minus 235 or thereabouts. The Tapology votes aren't overly close. That's why I bring this up. 840 total votes, 87% Mazo, 84% by decision. I think the most telling stat is the output for Mazo. 7.14 strikes landed per minute in the UFC. For the strikes absorbed per minute from Alexis Davis, 4.18. So I don't love that. Her striking defense at 55%, and the 83% takedown defense from Mazo so far in the 4 UFC fights. Again, I don't love the Moroz fight. I don't even love the split decision win over JJ Aldrich, especially coming into this one. But I will go with the Colombian Queen here.
So, last point for me on Alexis Davis, just something you should watch out for, and I forgot to bring this up. She gets into a ton of 50-50 exchanges. I know we talk about this sometime. Alexis Davis is the definition of that. And again, you're going to make fun of us, Cindy Dandwell. But even look back at that fight. Like, Alexis Davis, stylistically, you can just tell from her technique.
Bites down on the mouthpiece and just starts hammering away.
But the way that she throws her punches is better than the way that Cindy Dandwell. Like, technique beats just power. And you look at the technique behind Davis's strikes. She's the much more technical fighter. But again, she will just kind of stay in the pocket, and while she throws, she will be hittable. You don't want to do that against Mazo. Like, you will want to do more of that smothering game plan if you are Davis. I wouldn't just stay in the pocket with a fighter like Sabina, because that's when a knee comes up the middle. That's when she does catch you with an elbow or something big. So again, Alexis Davis, she will be hittable, and she does show the damage, just heads up. But again, it's not an unwinnable fight for her.
Viviane Araújo cracked her in the first round of their fight. So I'm really looking forward to this one. It's a possible fight of the night on our cards, for frig's sake. So I'm going with Mazo. You're going with Mazo. It should be a great one, but overall, an awesome card. A great main event. We have Ciryl Gane, Le Bon Gamin, from a great country of France. Hopefully they can get some of those live shows once we start to open up, taking on Jairzinho, Rozenstruik, and maybe Suriname gets a card. Who knows? So it should be a great one. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. This fight is definitely a clash of styles. We have the great, Alexander the Great, that is, Hernandez, taking on Thiago Moises. And in a fight where Thiago Moises, mainly known for his jiu-jitsu, we saw in his last fight against Bobby Green, he decided to strike a little bit, mix it up with some of the takedowns, and he was able to get the win. Definitely didn't think he won that fight, but he was able to get the win nonetheless. He's on a 2-fight win streak. He beat Michael Johnson and Bobby Green, and those are two real, not legends of the division, but they're close to it. I mean, they put on some very good fights in their long, illustrious UFC career. So for Moises, a guy that's a former RFA lightweight champ, he's only 25 years old, almost 26, coming into this one, representing American Top Team. The sky's almost the limit, but nobody's really talking about him. Finally gets the opportunity against the guy that's kind of a lightning rod for controversy in Hernandez. It switched things up. Of course, we know he's moved over to Factory X. He had that loss against Drew Dober last year where it definitely didn't look good for him. He comes back out against old Grits, Chris Grutzmacher, and finishes him and looks amazing in that fight. And it's kind of been the story of Alexander Hernandez's UFC career. Where is this guy?
Exactly. Honestly, I'll be honest. I've been a little bit underwhelmed by his UFC career up until this point, but you have to understand where his where his career got started off at. He knocked out Dariush in a minute. And that's a really, really big, like, it wasn't only that Dariush, at that time he was ranked too, which means even more, but when you make a UFC debut like that, people are going to start talking about you. Then of course we know what happened in his third fight, I guess. He beats OAM, and the OAM fight, I thought he should have looked better against. Listen, it was a back and forth fight. It was pretty 50-50, honestly. Like, Hernandez probably won 2 of the 3 rounds, don't get me wrong. But at the end of that fight, I don't really think, like, he proved he was the better martial artist than Olivier Aubin-Mercier was. And then he fights Cowboy. And we all remember that fight. We remember the pre-fight press conferences. Called him a bunch of mean names, and then he got head kicked. It didn't look very good. But after that fight, you look at the career of Alexander Hernandez, and I thought the Cowboy loss was going to be one of those situations where you lose to one of the better guys in the division, you're going to go back, you're going to get better, and then the next time we see him, he's fighting at home in San Antonio against Massaranduba, Francisco Trinaldo, and he might have gotten the win in that fight, but if you're going to bring up the fact that Bobby Green probably beat Thiago Moises in that fight, which I do agree with, Francisco Trinaldo beat Alexander Hernandez in their fight as well, and I don't want to say it was home cooking or anything, but it was a little odd that it was in his hometown, and he did get a very close decision. But the thing with Hernandez is, you know he's got the power in his hands. You know he's got the wrestling. He feels like he's too excited to fight, and I know that's a weird thing to say, but you just see him in the way that he gets started. Alexander Hernandez loves to get off to a fast start, but the thing that always comes to mind is, remember when James Krause was under a lot of fire when when Anthony Smith had lost to Glover Teixeira because they said, oh, his corner's constantly yelling at him. They're making him think he has to do something. Hernandez kind of has that same vibe in the cage where from the second the fight goes, he feels like he always has to be doing something, and sometimes it makes him walk into big shots. Sometimes it makes him not the reserved fighter that he should be. And against Chris Grutzmacher, yeah, he looked phenomenal, but Chris Grutzmacher, I would say, is an entry-level UFC fighter. He's the type of guy who you normally give, oh, you're making your UFC debut.
Great hair, though.
Great hair, though, don't get me wrong. But listen, he beat Joe Lozon, who's basically at the end of his career. He has a TKO loss to Artem Lobov from The Ultimate Fighter. Like, you kind of know what you're going to get with
Chris. Julian Rosa.
So does Julian Rosa, but you kind of know what you're going to get with Chris Grutzmacher. And honestly, Alexander Hernandez, in my mind at least, is quite a bit ahead of him in that fight. So you didn't learn a lot from the Grutzmacher fight. I think this is one of the more important fights of Alexander Hernandez's career because Thiago Moises, you mentioned, not a lot of people are talking about him, but the people who know that a win over him really means a lot. And if Hernandez, listen, he's got the personality, he's got the look. Maybe you don't like his personality, but people at least talk about Alexander Hernandez. And it's the old quote, listen, you pay to see me win or you pay to see me lose. Alexander Hernandez, people still watch him fight because they do want to see him lose. And if he can beat a guy like Thiago Moises, yes, to the broader MMA fan, it might not mean that much. But to the people watching this video, and especially to us, like, that means a lot. And that's how you get back on track to start fighting those guys in the top 15. But he better not go for a single takedown in this fight, and I will let you explain why.
If you look at Alexander Hernandez, he goes for a lot of takedowns. I mean, he goes for about 2 or so per fight. For Thiago Moises, 1.29 so far in his UFC career. I will say this. How does Thiago Moises lose? Well, he loses to very good strikers or very well-rounded fighters. Beneil Dariush, the example. Hernandez knocked him out. Moises lost the decision where he got outclassed. He did attempt a lot of submissions. That's the thing. This guy is a black belt to the nth degree, and if he gets you down, unless you're very adept at getting back up to your feet, or you're a really high-level wrestler like a Bobby Green is, then you're going to be able to get out of some of the bad situations. And for the fighters that he's taken down, he took down Kurt Holloway multiple times. He outstruck him. He was in position for the majority of that fight. He beat Gladson Kutis over on Brazilian Contender Series, and he looked really good. He had the knockdowns in that fight, and he was able to do things with his hands. That's the thing, man. This guy's scary because once you get your hands going and his wrestling's pretty good and his jiu-jitsu's great, that's when there's a big problem. Like Gilbert Burns. Like, you have a big problem on your hands if the guy can bring it together. And he's only 25 years old, almost 26. And Fernandez, 28. He's got the power in his hands. His defensive wrestling isn't all that great. And so far in the UFC, we've seen him taken down by Cowboy Cerrone and OAM, and that's been about it so far. He himself was able to take down Drew Dober, which I like. But again, he got caught in that fight. He looked great against Grutzmacher, like we said, which you were kind of going to come to expect. So the numbers are really difficult to look at. Moises gets cracked quite a bit. In the fight against Demirs Magulov, it was kind of like a wet blanket. He got outstruck, and everything just kind of went in favor of his Magulov. And I'd like to see Demirs Magulov fighting more, but in a fight like this, it is tricky. It's tough to kind of get a great read on it. So let's look at the odds and the votes first, and then we'll kind of give our final analysis. The odds in this one, Hernandez open to minus 140, now minus 193 favorite. For Thiago Moises, open to plus 120 underdog. He's now at a plus 159. If you look at the total Tapology votes, decent sample size so far, 826 total votes, 70% going with Hernandez, 63% by decision. I think Hernandez can win a decision, but if you went back and watched the fight that Bobby Green had, Bobby Green outstruck Thiago Moises, and I thought he won that fight, not from pillar to post, but I thought he won that fight. 11 of 15 total MMA media members over on MMA Decisions had Bobby Green to win that fight as well. So I was very surprised that Green didn't win that fight. For Hernandez, you got to strike with volume, and you have to strike to make it count. You can't just be darting in and out, moving, and just making it look like you're doing something. You got to start cracking Moises. For Moises, you just got to kind of last the fight. I mean, you got to follow. You got to kind of lash. You got to kind of wear on Hernandez. Fight the fight that Olivier Aubert-Mercier fought, and that might be a path to victory. If he tries to just do volume against Hernandez, he's probably going to get cracked. So for me, again, I have Hernandez in this fight, but Moises has passed the victory. He's good at wrestling. If Hernandez's takedown defense isn't on point for this one, and we've seen him training with a lot of high-level fighters with Factory X. I know I had it in my notes. We've had a couple of Factory X fighters. Vince Cachero is one of them. Chris Gutierrez is another one. So a lot of guys that can kind of somewhat emulate Thiago Moises as far as striking and the takedowns are concerned, but it's really hard to find somebody with the jiu-jitsu of Moises, so that's what makes this a very interesting fight.
It's a tough fight to predict, it really is, and to me, it does come down to the wrestling between these two. Hernandez is the better pure wrestler. There's no doubt in my mind whatsoever. The thing is, Thiago Moises has, and I like that you brought up the Cerrone fight. Here's the thing with the Cerrone fight. Cerrone did take down Hernandez, but Hernandez popped right back up to his feet. And the other thing about Cowboy is, people forget, Cowboy is one of the better MMA wrestlers out there. Like, yeah, he doesn't have the background, but you just talk about strict MMA wrestling, Cowboy Cerrone can get pretty much anyone to the ground. Like, he's got a really nice double leg. So I don't think getting taken down by Cowboy Cerrone is the end of the world by any means, but I do think it's an important point that you brought up. If Moises does take Hernandez down, it will be over. And I do think this fight, it'll be kind of similar to the Michael Johnson fight. You look at the first round of the Michael Johnson fight, Moises lands one punch and gets completely outclassed. And I'll be honest, I remember watching that fight, thinking Michael Johnson was going to win. And at the end of that first round, my confidence was pretty high. I'm like, wow, he defended a takedown attempt. He looked good on the feet. Like, this is the real Michael Johnson. And then you see how good Moises is on the ground. It's always that X factor. When you have those Thiago Moises, Antonio Carlos Jr., I understand he's no longer in the UFC, but you get it. Just guys who are that level of a black belt, you're never safe on the ground with them. So Hernandez, I like him on the feet. I think he does have the slightly better wrestling. I think he's got underrated cardio too. I do like his output because I talked about the OAM fight and how it was a close fight. It was a grueling fight though. It really was. And the fact that Hernandez was still somewhat fresh by the third round. It was just back and forth scrambles and top control and wrestling. He showed off pretty good gas tank in that fight. So I think Hernandez can defend enough takedowns to keep this fight on the feet. Probably get it done by decision, but this is a really exciting fight.
I love the fight. We're both going with Alexander, the great Alexander Hernandez, to get the win. It should be a great fight on a great card. Of course, you get Ciryl Gane taking on Jairzinho, Rozenstruik in our main events. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. This is probably one of the oddest and most interesting fights on our card. Coming up this weekend, you've got Rozenstruik, Ciryl Gane. You also have Alex Caceres, Bruce Leroy, taking on the hard-hitting hillbilly, also known as Crash. I've seen that on his Instagram, Kevin Croom. These guys, while they might not be at the top of everybody's list for, featherweights to look out for because they have a ton of experience, well, that's just the thing. They have a ton of MMA experience, and they're very crafty veterans. And for Caceres, he's been around in the UFC for the longest time. He's almost 33 years old. For Kevin Croom, 33, he just got the crack at the UFC on short notice, taking on Roosevelt Roberts. And Roberts was supposed to take on Matt Frevola. We had Frevola to beat Roberts. I went back and watched the question mark kicks where it was me, alone, with my denim on denim, wearing my bolo tie. And I said, yeah, Roosevelt Roberts is probably going to win the fight. Roberts goes in there super cocky. Bisping says from the start, Roosevelt Roberts sent me a message on Twitter, said that he was going to go out there and throw the hands at Kevin Croom, and that was going to be it. And that's what he does. Head up high, starts striking with Kevin Croom. Croom goes in there with nothing to lose, cracks him. So then Roberts hits the canvas, pops right back up. Croom goes front choke and is able to get that standing guillotine type choke up against the cage. Awesome win. And it's a draw on his record because he smoked a little bit of pot before the fight or took a spray or ate a gummy or whatever he did. So that fight, cross that one off. He's still on a win streak, but cross that one off. and he loses performance bonus. Well, now, as you know, in Nevada, that's no longer an issue, and, USADA's not looking at it. Still drawing that record, so change that, please. But Kevin Croom, an awesome win in that fight. He was a huge underdog to about the tune of a plus 350. He comes in here against Alex Caceres, who's on a win streak of his own right. 3 wins in a row. Ocho Peterson, Chase Hooper, and Austin Springer. He looked really good in the Chase Hooper fight. He looked really good in the Austin Springer fight. Alex Caceres starting to bring the heat, and I love it. I think this fight is going to be more competitive than a lot of people might think. I think this is a highly entertaining fight. It might not be the highest level featherweight fight, but these guys individually, if you go down through their records, they might have beaten some guys that aren't that great, but they've fought some really good competition.
Exactly, and honestly, at the end of the day, what do you want more? You just want exciting MMA fights, and that's what you're getting in this. And Alex Caceres is weird, because he fights the level of his competition, kind of like Kelvin Gastelum. Now, no, I don't think Caceres could fight Volkanovski to, one of the greatest fights of all time, like Gastelum did with his champ, but get the idea. Alex Caceres, just his style is so hard to solve. He can fight from both stances, he's so unorthodox, he can throw so many different spinning techniques, and a lot of people did fall into the rut of comparing him to Yair Rodriguez constantly, because he had that main event against him so many years ago. He doesn't fight that much like Yair. He throws some of the wilder techniques, but I wouldn't really say Alex Caceres is the power on the end of his shots. When Alex Caceres does throw a lot of those spinning techniques, they're just to set up different things, and it's sort of Zabit-esque. Now, a lot of people are going to hate on me because I haven't talked bad about Zabit for a little while, but finally, it's my time to shine. He throws them and he doesn't really land, and it is a detriment to Alex Caceres because spinning techniques are great when you land them, but when you don't land them, it's a massive expenditure of energy that you really don't have to put yourself through. And yeah, he's on a 3-fight win streak, and you're a lot higher on Ocho than I am, but Steven Peterson, again, he's in that sort of entry-level UFC category. I would say Chase Hooper, probably a little too young to be in the UFC still, probably should develop a little bit on the outside. But Alex Caceres still, at the end of the day, you look back, he does have a win over Sergio Pettis. He did have a good fight with Uriah Faber. He did have a split decision win, or loss to Yair Rodriguez. Goodness. The highs have been high for Alex Caceres, but then here's the other thing.
Remember that fight against Jason Knight?
Yeah, there was a fight against Jason Knight where he got dominated. There was a fight against Gracie where he got Croom Gracie. He got dominated. It's just been a weird career for Alex Caceres because, again, you think about the highs, and remember, he's been with the UFC since the Ultimate Fighter that GSP coached against Josh Koscheck. It's been a while for old Alex Caceres, and I hate to say he's the new Eric Silva, but I think it's finally time to give Alex Caceres that mantle. Kevin Croom is going to bring a fight out of him, though, and Kevin Croom is going to offer Alex Caceres a lot of different troubles because of the forward pressure, and we've seen Alex Caceres struggle a lot with guys who pressure him because he does have good footwork. He doesn't always use it, and that's the weird thing about Caceres. Footwork's kind of an added-in benefit to his style, to that long karate style. Most guys who fight like that just generally have a great sense of where they are in the cage, but for Caceres, he'll kind of move almost too much and get himself backed up to the cage, and at that point, against a guy like Kevin Croom, he will go for takedowns. He will throw up top. He will throw to the body. He's going to keep you guessing, and that's the best way to beat Alex Caceres. Just constantly make him think and constantly make him guess.
For Kevin Croom and William McFarland, I know you're out there listening to this one, so this one's for you. Kevin Croom has a win over your buddy, Prince Edward Island's own Lenny Wheeler. And that's the thing. I look at Kevin Croom's losses lately since 2014. Jesse Brock, Razul Mirzaev, Tatsuya Endo, maybe not the best one. Matt Bissett, Nate Jennerman, Camila Kirk, and John Macapa or John Teixeira. I mean, those are credible losses. Now, the wins on that 3-fight win streak, Anderson Henderson, Adil Benjelani. Bellator likes to push him, but not the greatest to win by split decision in 2020. Felony Bennett. I mean, you've heard of him. And then a win over Derek Minner back in 2018. Well, that holds a lot of water since last weekend. So, Kevin Croom, kill or be killed. Alex Caceres, kill or split decision or get dominated. So it's really tough to tell what you're going to get out of really both of these guys. That's the trouble for me. I look at the odds. Alex Caceres is a big favorite in this one. He opened a minus 300. He's now at a minus 226. Croom opened plus 250. He's now at a plus 180 or thereabouts. A lot of Tapology votes on this one. If we compare and contrast, 816 of them, 20%. Have Croom, 80% have Caceres, 82% of the voters who have Caceres having to win by decision. So really, he's just got to do enough to beat Kevin Croom. He's got to stay on his bike. He's got to stay busy on the outside, switch stances, pop the jab, throw some kicks, and he should be able to get the win. There's definitely an easier path to victory for finish for Kevin Croom, especially like we said, the fight against Jason Knight, some of the other fights, like even the split decision fights he's had. Martin Bravo in 2018 have a split decision against him. Doesn't look great, But then you look at the 3-fight win streak that Caceres on, it's pretty good. So it's really tricky to try and, pick a winner in this one. And I know that's been kind of the case for some of the fights on this one. What's your overall take here at the end?
So here's the thing. I'm going to pick Alex Caceres, but Alex Caceres is like Claudia Gadelha, or she's like a lot of there's a lot of fighters I can't get a good read on, and I can be honest about that. Sometimes I don't have a good idea of what a guy's skill set is, and for Alex Caceres, he's a great striker who has zero power, and that's really weird. Like, you don't really see that a lot. Normally, when you do have a guy who throws the techniques of Alex Caceres, and just look at Caceres throw strikes, you're like, wow, if he lands with any of those, like, his opponent's really going to go down, and then he does. And you're like, oh, okay, nothing's really happened yet. I think Caceres is going to win, but let's be honest. No one would be surprised at all if Kevin Croom goes in there, cracks him with a big right hand, and then just dominates him on the ground. Like, Alex Caceres, there's always going to be that window for if you are a good wrestler, or if you can just sort of stifle his attacks enough, he won't go into a shell necessarily, but if you keep him thinking, again, it's like LeBron in the 2011 finals, if you sort of override his brain, he's going to stop throwing and become more of a defensive fighter because of it. So I'm going to pick Caceres ever so slightly, but not a confident pick at all.
I am all about taking chances on Crash / the hard-hitting hillbilly Kevin Croom in this one. And again, I like the finishing abilities. If you can come in up a weight class at 55, get the win over such a bigger fighter in Roosevelt Roberts, you come back down to your natural weight class of 45, you fight a guy like Alex Caceres. And again, bit of a Swiss Army knife, and he's really tough to try and beat. But if you're a guy like Croom, coming out of glory, MMA, and fitness, you saw what your training partner, who you beat in the past, Derek Minner, was able to do. I think he can come into this fight with a game plan like a lot of the glory guys have lately. You get it down to the mat, you get the submission. I really like Kevin Croom in this fight, and I'm going with the big underdog with a little bit of that line movement. So I'm going Croom, you're going Alex Caceres. This should be a very interesting fight, one that I'm going to have my eyeballs glued to the TV. Not that I don't for any of these fights, but it should be a great one. We've got Ciryl Gane taking on Jairzinho Rozenstruik in our main events. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. It's the remix to Ignition, hot and fresh out the kitchen. This is the rematch you didn't know you needed on short notice. We have Angela Hillmat taking on Ashley Yoder, the Spider Monkey. And I won't sing again for the rest of the prediction video, but it is an odd fight. At the same time, for Ashley Yoder, Matt, this is a fighter that a lot of people, us included, probably had written off. I mean, going into her last fight, she was 7-6 on a 2-fight losing streak, taking on Miranda Granger, who only had one loss at the time. Granger was 7-1. And I remember saying Miranda Granger's going to outstrike Ashley Yoder. Ashley Yoder's pretty good on the ground, has decent jiu-jitsu, has pretty good striking. Ashley Yoder put on a clinic in that fight. And I know that one of the judges had a 10-8 in that fight for her. And kudos, because I thought she did have a 10-8 round in that one as well. She looked amazing against Miranda Granger, who in a lot of circumstances is a long-rangey striker and a lot taller than a lot of the fighters in this division. And again, props to her. She looked great. In their original booking, Angela Hill had the decision win. She had a great start to the year. She fought just about every other weekend. And if you look at her last 5, she knocked out Ariane Carnelosi. That's probably the most yoked up fighter that you're going to find in the UFC. She finished Hannah Cyphers at home. Like, that was a North Carolina fight. She got a win there. She out Muay Thai'd Loma Lookbunmi, which was kind of crazy. And then she lost a close split decision to Claudia Gadelha, and then she lost a close split decision to Michelle Waterson. Now you're fighting 8-6 Ashley Yoder. It's been a weird time for Angela Hill.
It really has been, and I don't know if you're going to get mad for me giving my prediction away this early, but let's be honest, Angela Hill's going to win this fight. Like, I thought Angela Hill arguably beat Michelle Waterson, and she probably should have beat Claudia as well. And her last fight was a main event against Michelle Waterson. And here's the thing, Ashley Yoder, I'll be honest, I never thought that she'd have this long, illustrious UFC career, and not really that she has, but she's been around for a lot longer than I thought she would. And I do remember maybe we had referenced Miranda Granger as Ashley Yoder 2.0, not our best hot take of all time, but Yoder has made improvements throughout her UFC career. That's something I can't take away from her. She used to not be able to defend takedowns at all, and now she can keep the fight on the feet. And really, if she wants to go for the takedowns herself, that was really the story of the Granger fight. She dominated her on the mat. But this is my issue. Ashley Yoder on the feet is still a very hittable fighter, and her striking's not very dynamic. She is very boxing-oriented. She will throw the odd kick here and there, but you're asking Ashley Yoder to basically go out there and outstrike Angela Hill, because yes, Yoder's ground game's gotten better, but Angela Hill's fought in far better grapplers than Ashley Yoder and hasn't had trouble with them in the past. Even look, Claudia Gadelha is one of the better black belts in this division, and Angela Hill defended her takedown attempts, and it was really just a kickboxing fight that I thought Hill should have won. So Yoder's going to have to try to beat Angela Hill at her own game, and you just brought up Loma Lookbunmi. fight. Loma Lookboonmee is a ridiculous striker and a very good MMA Muay Thai practitioner, and I just don't think Ashley Yoder is going to be able to outstrike Angela Hill in this fight. I hate to give the prediction away so early, but for me, it's Angela Hill's the better wrestler. If she gets top position on Ashley Yoder, I doubt Yoder can reverse it. If it's just on the feet the whole time, Angela Hill, she has the leg kick, she has the volume, and she does have the cardio to go 3 hard rounds. So for me, and I know we like to give a good account on both fighters, but...
I will.
Oh, good. It's just, for me, I'm having a hard time finding where Ashley Yoder is going to win this fight against Hill.
For Ashley Yoder, you look at the losses, and I think they're incredibly telling. So if you go all the way back to 2016 on The Ultimate Fighter, she beats Jodie Esquibel, boxer. She loses to Kate Jackson, eventual title challenger with Bellator, big Kate Jackson guy. She beats Amber Brown over in Invicta, and then she gets into the UFC. You lose to Justine Kish, you lose to Angela Hill, you use a split decision to Mackenzie Dern, and that was a pretty close fight. You beat Amanda Bobby Cooper, negative record. You beat Siri Kondo, didn't have a good run in the UFC. You lose a split decision to Randa Marcos, now we're talking. You lose to Lavinia Souza, hold her in very high regard. You beat Miranda Granger, still don't really know what I have. So, with Ashley Yoder, I will say this, and I always used to say it about Randa Marcos, and I always say it about Carla Esparza. Always gaining something, always doing something in this strawweight division. You need to. Because if you stay stagnant at women's strawweight, you're not going to do anything. Look at Randa Marcos. She fights the same way she did when she came in. Again, I know I just defeated my point. She always adds just a little wrinkle, but she's always the same too. Like, she's always keeping her arms out there. She's going to wrestle. Maybe a leg kick here, maybe a little bit more of a jab, like just small
about
things.
Randa too much already.
Ashley Yoder is always gaining something. Her ground game gets better. She adds a wrinkle into her striking. Angela Hill, pretty good takedown defense, pretty slippery on the mat. You can see over on her Instagram, she's training her jiu-jitsu, and her striking second to none. Like, she's somebody that later on in life picked up Muay Thai to bring it into MMA and outstruck a lifelong Muay Thai artist.
Here's the thing, though, and
who was small.
It's important to beat Loma Lookboonmee, and yes, we hype up that win a lot. Let's be honest, Loma Lookboonmee is not the best representation of Muay Thai in MMA.
Atomweight.
Yes, she is an atomweight, but still, I just think the fact that Angela Hill has shown the ability to beat specialists at what they specialize in, and that's the most important thing. Even Hill, I thought she outstruck Michelle Waterson for the majority of that fight, and Michelle Waterson is one of the better fighters in the division of hitting and then not getting hit herself. So if you're able to counter-strike someone like Angela Hill, if you're able to stand in the pocket with some really good strikers in the division, and you have good takedown defense, like, other than the Jessica Andrades of the world, who was able to just pick up Angela Hill, outstrike her, just dominate her, really, I don't see someone like Ashley Yoder being able to physically dominate Angela Hill, and I do think that's the thing for Hill. She's going to struggle against the fighters who have a physical strength advantage over her. If she ever does fight, I guess if Tatiana Suarez ever fights again, like, fighters like that will give her trouble. But if she is just able to stand on the outside, have really just a kickboxing fight, I know Yoder's a decent wrestler. She's just not a good enough wrestler, I think, to get Hill down consistently.
You look at Hill's losses, and again, you want to talk telling. Carla Esparza on The Ultimate Fighter, Tisha Torres, Rose Namajunas, Jessica Andrade, Nina Ansaroff, Cast Iron, Courtney Casey, Randa Marcos, beats Jodie Esquibel, lose to Yan Xiaonan, lose to Gedalia, lose to Waterson. Waterson's been at the top of the heap. Gedalia's been at the top of the heap. Yan Xiaonan's the next big thing. Randa Marcos back in 2019. You beat Jodie Esquibel. Doesn't tell me anything. They both have wins over Jodie Esquibel. Sure. Doesn't tell me much. Good boxer. Keith Jardine. Where you at? Beat Carnelossi. Beat Cyphers. Beat Lookboonmee. The wins are kind of tough, so you got to beat Ashley Yoder and vice versa. You got to beat Angela Hill to even get close to cracking the top 15. You lose this fight, you're in a bad spot.
Oh, yeah.
So for me, I look at the odds. Again, Angela Hill open a minus 175, now a minus 318 average on best fight odds. Biggest mover and shaker of the week. Yoder open plus 150, now at a plus 251. And if we look over at the Topology votes, no surprise, 641 total votes, 88% Hill, 88% decision. I also have Angela Hill in this fight. I don't think it's a huge surprise. I just want to say Ashley Yoder is better than that record shows you, but I could say the same thing about Angela Hill. You're 12-9. You fought some of the best competition out there and lost to some of the best. Ashley Yoder's lost to some pretty good fighters too. So I have Angela Hill. You have Angela Hill.
100%.
It should be a great fight in one of the most dynamic divisions in women's MMA. But I mean, women's flyweight knocking on that door. So really looking forward to this one. Both going with Hill. Really looking forward to our main event. We have Rozenstruik taking on Gane. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, man, as we always say. Let's get into it. Big time matchup between two top contenders and guys that have fought in the past. We have Pedro, the man, Munhoz, taking on Jimmie Rivera, El Terror. Matt, we talked about this fight a few weeks ago, so we'll dive back into that prediction. Of course, that bout was scrapped or rescheduled due to a COVID scare from El Terror. But yeah, we get it now, so we'll jump back into that and we'll offer up our final thoughts. Maybe we had a difference of opinion and our final predictions up at the end. Thomas Jane would be proud. We have the young Punisher, Pedro Munhoz, taking on Jimmie Rivera, El Terror, for the second time, because this fight was originally scheduled and happened in 2015. Jimmie Rivera picking up a big decision win in that fight. It was a split, and if you look at Jimmie Rivera's record, and it'll pop up on these screens because these guys have a ton of experience, but Jimmie Rivera, out of his 23 pro wins, 17 of them by decision, and he is the definition of a boxer who can wrestle. And it's a bit of an opposite. We always talk about, fighters from Extreme Couture. They're a wrestle boxer. Justin James, we saw last weekend, wrestle boxer. Brad Tavares, same thing. Jimmie Rivera is a boxer with really good wrestling, and I love that out of him. It always produces for an interesting fight. And that's a weird thing to say, because out of a guy that has that many decision wins and such a decision percentage, normally you think, man, boring fights, but I always get up for a Jimmie Rivera fight. Marlon Moraes, good fight for Marlon. It was a fun one, but on paper, it was a really good one. And if you look since that fight, a decision win over John Dodson, he loses to Aljamain Sterling. That was a halfway competitive fight, though. I mean, they both went back and forth. He loses to Petr Yan by decision. I mean, the guy's the champ. And it was a halfway competitive fight. And then he beats, in his last time out, Cody Stamann. And that was the fight where, man, Jimmie Rivera's got to get a win here. And you're taking on such a good wrestler in Cody Stamann. But he was really able to just outlast him, outstrike him. And he picked up a really good win and kind of kept his standing in this division. The other thing for me with Jimmie Rivera, this guy's been around forever, and he's only 31 years old. Like, you look at the fights that he had in Bellator. He's a longtime Bellator guy, like fighting the Brian Kelleher's of the world. Names that you recognize. He's been fighting a very high-level competition for a very long time. And with Pedro Munhoz, the same thing can be said, but the thing with Pedro Munhoz is a lot of finish wins and a lot of really big statement wins. The Brett Johns fight was a great fight, UFC 227. He finishes Brian Caraway. Poor Brian Caraway. He finishes Cody Garbrandt, and listen, that was the third knockout loss in a row for Cody Garbrandt that kind of sent him away for a while. And then if you look at his losses, well, he loses to Aljamain Sterling, he gets rebooked 3 times, and then fights Frankie Edgar to a split decision, and I disagree with that decision there.
I did think Pedro Munhoz won that fight, but it's really interesting because he's going to have the same issue in this fight as he did in his last. And really, Pedro Munhoz is going to have this problem in all of his fights. He's the only fighter that I can remember where the commentators say, hey, Pedro Munhoz, he's kind of slow, and that's something they always mention. They're like, Pedro Munhoz, he's one of the slower fighters you'll ever see. And it's weird because he does have really good stand-up. He has great kicks, really good punching. He loves to talk about how he trains a lot with Brazilian national boxers. Now, he's never been dropped, not even in the gym, and he hasn't been dropped in a fight before. He's never been finished, which really is wild, especially when you look at the guys who Pedro Munhoz has fought throughout his career. Nothing but killers his whole run, especially in the UFC. This fight is so interesting because Jimmie Rivera, a lot of his fights come down to this. Is he going to be able to outvolume his opponent or not? Because we know how good his takedown defense is. No one is going to be able to outgrind Jimmie Rivera. And that was kind of the story going into the Cody Stamann fight. It was, okay, Cody Stamann really good at wrestling, can throw his hands a little bit. Jimmie Rivera, I can throw my hands a little bit, but I'm pretty good at wrestling too. He's just sort of the perfected version of Cody Stamann. Now, I understand he's a little bit older, but he's a better striker, and he can go out there and outstrike guys, whereas Cody Stamann really needs the wrestling. What I like about Jimmie Rivera is, if he has the wrestling and if he can take his opponent down, it's just kind of an added benefit. It just allows him to bring another wrinkle into the cage where if he can just go out there and volume strike with his opponent, 9 times out of 10, he can beat them. And the great fight for Jimmie Rivera to go back and watch is the Thomas Almeida fight. And I understand, Thomas Almeida, he's fighting Sean O'Malley now. He used to be a guy people thought could fight for the title.
The Dragon beat him.
Exactly. But Jimmie Rivera, he dropped him multiple times in that fight, and it showed that Rivera does have a little bit of pop on the end of his shots. I know a lot of his wins do come by decision, but Rivera's a really good striker, and he does have great boxing combinations. And that's what this fight comes down to for me. Pedro Munhoz is probably the better boxer than Jimmie Rivera. He's the better kickboxer. I think his leg kicks are going to give Rivera a lot of issues. And I don't think Rivera can take Pedro Munhoz down because I do think the jiu-jitsu of Pedro Munhoz is not something you want to really mess around with. Here's my problem, though. Pedro Munhoz is kind of slow on the feet, and Jimmie Rivera never gets tired and can just keep on throwing volume really easy throughout 15 minutes. It's not that I don't think Pedro Munhoz is the better fighter. I just think in a 3-round atmosphere, this fight really perfectly suits Jimmie Rivera's style.
You look at Pedro Munhoz training out of American Top Team at this point, some of the best fighters in the world. And we talked about this really, really early on in these prediction videos. I want to say it was when we were talking about the fight of the night. It's been a little bit of time. But we talked about the fact that Jimmie Rivera trains out of Tiger Schulman's mixed martial arts. Tiger Schulman is one of those guys, and you're going to have Joe Rogan on the call for this one because it's pay-per-view in the States. I bet you Joe Rogan goes off on Tiger Schulman, and rightfully so, because he's one of those coaches like Colin Oyama, like some of those real underground coaches where they might not have the biggest stable of fighters, but they have really, really good fighters. And I look at the guys that have trained under Tiger in the past, Lyman Good, Julio Arce, Shane Burgos, Mike Trezano, and so on and so forth. They're fighters that might not pop off the top of your head as, man, that's a great fighter, but they are really, really good fighters, and guys that fight in somewhat similar styles. Like when I look at Good and Arce and Burgos and Trezano, well, what are they great at? They're good at boxing. They have pretty good takedown defense. For Jimmie Rivera, he has some of the best takedown defense in MMA, 92% in a huge sample size in the UFC. And the same thing can be said for Pedro Munhoz, 80% to this point. Munhoz definitely has the better submission ability. You know that coming into this fight. But Munhoz, again, on the feet, you look at the fight that he had against Cody Garbrandt. It was the hooks. He got cracked by Garbrandt. He cracked him right back and dropped him. Pedro Munhoz is a great striker. In the fight against his last time out against Frankie Edgar, didn't really have a ton of power, or Frankie Edgar had a great chin in that one. It just didn't work for him in his last fight against Corey Sandhagen. Definitely got that wrong, got laughed off the internet. But we look at this fight, I think it's an amazing rematch. If you got really excited about the fight last weekend between Diego Ferreira and Beneil Dariush, this is another one of those fights that, man, I'm so glad we get to see this rematch.
Oh, without a doubt. Listen, it's weird, especially where Pedro Munhoz is in his career right now. And I'm going to say this. If he loses to Jimmie Rivera and Dana White decides to cut Pedro Munhoz, we're going to have issues, Dana White and myself personally. Because Pedro Munhoz really is one of the elite in this division. And on his best day can beat any guy. The most outrageous thing about the UFC's rankings, and trust me, there's a number of things that are outrageous about those rankings, is that Cody Garbrandt was ranked ahead of Pedro Munhoz right after he beat Rafael Assunção. He just knocked out Cody Garbrandt not that long ago, and I understand Cody just kind of stood there and traded overhand rights with Pedro Munhoz, but you can't forget about that performance. Munhoz, on his best day, can knock out any guy in this division.
Would Pedro Munhoz have gotten a title opportunity at 125 with a win like that?
Probably not. Now, he can't make 125, so that doesn't really matter, but I think Pedro Munhoz has all the tools to beat Jimmie Rivera. It just stylistically, Jimmie Rivera is probably going to win this fight again. And it sucks to say, but you look at how Pedro's lost his last two fights, and even if you thought he beat Frankie, he was very hittable in that Frankie fight, and Frankie was able to land in volume and win rounds that way. Same thing with Aljamain Sterling. Aljamain Sterling, I understand. He's going to be fighting for a title. Fighting him is just very difficult. He's super unorthodox, and he throws, again, a very high level of volume, which was really hard on Pedro Munhoz, who would just try to counter with single shots. Unless you're standing there to be hit by that single shot, which of course Jimmie Rivera isn't because he has such good footwork, I just don't think you're going to be able to beat him. So I like Jimmie Rivera a lot in this fight, probably by decision.
And I mean, like you said, both these guys have fought Aljamain Sterling in the past. They both lost decisions. In 2019, they both fought John Dodson in 2018, Rivera getting the win. And you look over at Pedro Munhoz having the loss on his record. And as we always like to do, Matt, with Fight Night picks, we'll look at the Tapology votes and the odds. And bit of a shift, 733 total votes on Tapology, 54% Munhoz, 46% Rivera. 90% of the Rivera contingency going with a decision win. 76% of the Munhoz fans going with a decision win his way. If you look at the odds, Jimmie Rivera opened to -150, now at a -148 or thereabouts. This one was kind of shuffled on short notice. And if you look across at Pedro Munhoz, opened at a +130s, now at a -122. So the fans sort of going with Munhoz, the odds sort of going with Rivera, but there's people kind of putting some money in on Munhoz. I definitely think Munhoz has the, better path to a finish in this fight, and I don't think that has nothing to do with the Tapology votes. Jimmie Rivera has so many fights that have gone to decision, but Jimmie Rivera, again, really good boxer, really good at range, and great takedown defense. Munhoz has a lot more power, but I really like Jimmie Rivera in this fight.
So this is a super fun fight, and it's kind of hard to be confident in either guy when you're talking about two of the best fighters and arguably the best weight class in the UFC. Like, Jimmie Rivera, yeah, he's had some losses, but honestly, 135, I do think their top 15 is as good as any other division, so there's no shame in it. But I do think, listen, the wrestling defense of Jimmie Rivera is going to cause Pedro Munhoz some issues, because we all know how good Munhoz is on the ground, but I just don't know if he'll ever be able to get it there. I think the leg kicks of Munhoz, if he can start landing those early like we saw in the Edgar fight, they might add up, but I'm in agreement with you. I think Jimmie Rivera will be able to win decision, but this could be an amazing fight. Like, I've been excited for this fight every time they've rebooked it, so hopefully we finally do get it this weekend.
Matt, we're really looking forward to this fight. We both have Jimmie Rivera to get the win. It should be a great card headlined by Biggie Boy, Jairzinho, Rozenstruik, et le bon gamin, Ciryl Gane, representing France. Should be a great one. Really look forward to it. Keep locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. As we always say, let's get into it. Very interesting fight at women's flyweight in a division where we just keep talking about it. There's more and more women's flyweight fights, more so than strawweight, more so than bantamweight that we've seen recently. And look at featherweight. You've got a 1-0 Danielle Wolf taking on Felicia Spencer. Look forward to that. And I guess you had Megan Anderson taking on the one and only Amanda Nunes. But at flyweight, this is an important fight for the division. We have Montana De La Rosa taking on Mayra Bueno Silva. And for Mayra Bueno Silva, this is somebody that I had really, really high hopes for very early on. She comes into the UFC off a ninja choke win over Mayana Souza over on Contender Series. She was only 4-0 at the time. She comes in and submits Jillian Robertson in the first round when Robertson was only 5-2. Holy smokes. She takes off a lot of time, loses a decision to Marina Moroz in classic Marina Moroz fashion, and it's like, what have we got here with Mayra? I mean, she's got the flames tattooed on her arm. Like, she looks tough. What can she do? She goes out there against Mara Romero Barella, submits her in the first round, and wow, Craig's confidence is back in Mayra Bueno Silva. And for Montana De La Rosa, we've seen her kind of switch camps somewhat recently. She's at Team Elevation now, training with some of the best in the business. You saw Shanna Dobbs last weekend, and good, bad, or indifferent, you know that she's at least going to be working her jiu-jitsu and her wrestling, especially coming into this fight. You look at her run in the UFC, a little weird, and you look at her run in general. She lost to Mackenzie Dern and Cynthia Calvillo 2016-17 respectively. She picks up a win. She fights on Contender Series. The Ultimate Fighter. She beats Matt's favorite fighter, Ariel Beck.
Oh, a dominant force.
She loses to Nico Montano. She beats Christina Marks in the finale. We haven't seen a lot of Christina Marks since. She beats Rachel Ostovich.
She does fights.
Yeah, she beats Nadia Kasem, who didn't look that good in the UFC.
Another fighter.
Loses to Andrea Lee, beats Mara Romero Barella as well by decision, and then loses to Viviane Araujo in impressive fashion.
So is Montana De La Rosa kind of like the 125 females Thomas Almeida?
I don't know.
Because it is weird, and you do bring up a great point. Okay, so you lose to Andrea Lee, and I get it. Andrea Lee, she might not always beat the upper echelon, but I do think Andrea Lee is a very good fighter in this weight class, and a frustrating fighter to fight too. If you can't take Andrea Lee down, she's going to 1-2 you, and every time you go for a takedown, run to the other side of the cage. Like, just a frustrating style, especially if you're a fighter like Montana De La Rosa, and we saw that in the fight. She was able to get some takedowns, but for De La Rosa, it's odd too. If she's able to get the takedown, sometimes she is able to hold her opponent down to the ground. Then you look at the Lee fight, and Lee was just really good at getting her butterfly hooks and getting back up to her feet and that, and really making Montana De La Rosa just pay every time that they were on the feet. And for De La Rosa, that concerns me moving forward. It's her striking defense more than anything. We talk about this a lot with wrestlers too, how wrestlers in their hand placement, sometimes they leave their hands up high, sometimes they're a little bit too low. It's just, you can tell that there isn't the level of comfort in Montana De La Rosa's striking, and I'm not going to compare her exactly to a Jack Hermanson, but he's a fighter who I like to bring up when you talk about elite fighters who, there's a level of comfort in their striking that you can tell they're not there yet. When he is on the feet for extended periods of time, and this applies to Montana De La Rosa as well, she'll throw, and then you can tell she doesn't like getting hit, and she does panic every now and then, and when she goes for those panic takedowns, there's nothing that gets me more fired up, because she just fatigues herself, and that Andrea Lee fight does stand out in my mind, because Montana De La Rosa, it would be panic takedown, especially by the third round. It was, I'd shoot a fatigue takedown, I wouldn't get it, I'll slowly get back up to my feet. I'll take a few shots, and I'll slowly go for another panic takedown. If you do that against the, lower level of your division, you might be able to win fights. But when you do start to fight the Mayra Bueno Silvas, when you do start to fight the upper echelon of the 125 women's divisions, you're not going to be able to just get away with being the better wrestler in your fights. And for Bueno Silva, I'm not talking like she's some dominant striker on the feet by any means, but Montana De La Rosa hasn't shown me much on the feet to say that if she just keeps this standing, she can win a decision.
Do not love the striking out of either one of these fighters, and if you look at Maida Buena Silva, the numbers are a little bit skewed, just a little bit by the fight that she had against Marina Moroz, and the fact that her striking differential, 4.44 given to 6.74 taken. They had a fight in the night in that one. The striking numbers weren't crazy, but 56% clip for Moroz. How many landed? I don't know, but still, she got outstruck, she lost the fight. Negative strike differential for Montana De La Rosa. You know, defense isn't really the strong suit. More accuracy on the side of Maida Bueno Silva. And if you look at the takedowns, well, you're going to see Montana De La Rosa, like you said, go for a lot more and earn a lot more. Good takedown defense for Silva, and if somebody shoots on her, she's going to submit you. Exactly. So that's the thing. Very high-level submissions from Silva. I remember before her last fight, we were going into it, and it was like, all right, picking up steam. Back on the Maida Buena Silva train. I'm going to watch all these weird Facebook videos and Instagram videos of her training. It was a lot of her boxing. She comes out of Shoot the Box Diego Lima down in Brazil. There's one fighter that you should definitely know from that gym, and it's not Diego Lima, whose name's spelled differently and just fought Bilal Muhammad, set him up for a big fight, but it's Charles Oliveira. He trains out of there. And there are other very high-level fighters, but that's probably the most high-level fighter that's coming out of that camp. But it just goes to show you that she can work all of those things in Brazil at that gym and go to a high level. I like that out of her. For De La Rosa, again, coming out of elevation, you're going to train with a lot of great partners. But for me, the striking isn't totally there. Is the wrestling there? We're going to find out in this fight. Can she submit Maida Buena Silva, who only has the one loss by decision to Marina Moroz, a very frustrating striker? So for me, there's a lot more keys to a Maida Buena Silva win in this one. If I look at the Tapology votes, Matt, again, 813 of them, 77% for Buena Silva, 45% by decision, 48% by submission. If we have a look at the handy-dandy paper notes, Montana De La Rosa opened a plus 125 underdog. She's now at a plus 114 for Maida Buena Silva. She opened a minus 145, now at a minus 139. So the odds slightly favor Buena Silva. The Tapology votes are all over Buena Silva. I'm also all over Maida Buena Silva in this fight, not from a personal standpoint, but just in this fight. I like the flames on the forearm. I think she's going to be able to get the win.
So I like Maida Buena Silva in this fight. I'm not as confident in her ability as you, but here's the thing. Montana De La Rosa can win this fight. My issue, though, is I don't think she can outstrike Maida Buena Silva. I do think at some point she's going to have to use her wrestling if she wants to win this fight. If you use the wrestling against Buena Silva, you're probably going to end up getting tapped out. So this fight, one of two ways. Either see it being a very poor striking contest between these two, and honestly, I hate to say it, but there's a very high likelihood that's what we're going to get. Or Montana De La Rosa goes for a takedown, gets swept, and then if she's on the bottom of Buena Silva, she is going to get submitted. Buena Silva, top position, she's got the ground and pound. She has such a high level knowledge of submissions that it's a really poor position for De La Rosa to be in. I agree with you, Silva is probably going to win this fight, but I wouldn't be surprised if Montana De La Rosa did. If she uses that really heavy on top, just boring wrestling game plan, doesn't take too many risks, I think she can win rounds. I'm not going to predict that she's going to win the fight on the ground solely, but she is going to have to mix in her wrestling, and I think that's why Buena Silva is going to win.
Matt, if I can just throw out a reference out there to the Beastie Boys post 2000s. It's from Make Some Noise. Can't tell me nothing, can't tell me nada. I'm going with Maida Buena Silva in this one. You've also got the Brazilian fighter here. I'm really looking forward to this fight. It should be a great one, and we have an awesome main card continuing to roll on. Love the co-main event of Krylov and Ankalaev. Love the main event of Gane and Rozenstruik. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. Today's episode and entire show is brought to you by Manscaped, and we talked a lot about Manscaped. I will read the copy. I apologize if you're in Texas or the Southwest, but hey, fellas, we're in the thick of winter and the storms are brewing. Looks like 1 to 3 inches are in the forecast when you trim that hibernation bush that's taking place in your pants. Luckily, our partners at Manscaped specialize in products to make sure you're walking around town with beautiful snowballs. Matt, Manscaped is here to provide you with the best tools in your grooming experience, offering precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. Matt, they want me to talk about a funny grooming story. Let me tell you. I had a text intercepted by my mother about the fact that I didn't shave my nuts one time. That was the most awkward moment of my entire life. Matt's hearing about the story for the first time. I'm not lying, it's true. Go ask her. But if I had the Manscaped tools, the Lawnmower 3.0 with the light, you can see it in the camera. You can see it. This is around my nutsack. It works very well. And if, you're one of those guys that shaves your nuts in the shower or the surrounding areas, it's going to work really, really well. Now, maybe you've missed an opportunity the last couple of weeks. This is the greatest opportunity to toss that Lawnmower 3.0 into action. It's the best hygiene tool for the modern man because their ceramic blade and advanced skin-safe technology, your snags and your snowballs will be reduced. The trimmer is also waterproof. So like I said, you can use it in the shower, the jacuzzi if you're a savage. The performance package is the Best Buy 2021. And when you get it, you get that Lawnmower 3.0. I've talked about it. Would you stick that in your nose?
Not that you have multiple times on film. But...
I already did today. But the Weed Whacker, it works great for nose hair and ear hair removal. I actually did use it earlier on today. If you end up with this, you get a great, a travel bag, toiletry bag. And listen, you've had the nose hair. 79% of partners polled admitted to long nose hair, and it's a major turnoff. I had long nose hair.
And he's married now.
Until today, and she does care about it. The bundle also comes with a crop preserver ball deodorant. It's like a salve. Slap that stuff on and it works great. You also have the crop reviver, which is a nice little spritz. Use that if you need a little pick-me-up, that's when I use it. So check it out, crop preserver. It's an anti-chafing ball deodorant. It's going to make it smell nice and make you feel like your testes are walking around in a winter wonderland. They also have the cologne that just came out. Same smell that you know and love. You can just spray it up above. Maybe you want to spray it down below. It's great stuff. So get 20% off and free shipping. Manscaped.com. Use the promo code FNP. The free shipping. The 20% off. I know you have these products too.
I do.
You stand by them.
I'm a big believer in all of them. I might not be the one giving the pitch, but yeah, everything Craig's saying is 100% true. So if you want to help support the show and also get some great products while you're at it, use promo code FNP for 20% off and free shipping.
They also have a ton of amazing men's hygiene products on their website, from disposable mats for your pubes to foot deodorant. I can use it.
I need it.
My wife could use it. My wife's not Matt, but Matt could use it too. So overall, like I said, 20% off, free shipping at manscaped.com. Use promo code FNP. It's 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com. Use promo code FNP. Thanks, Manscaped, for making our winter wieners look so good. They wrote that, not me. Let's get into it. If the UFC gave me the keys to the company for one day and they let me sign bout sheets, I would make Nikita Krylov, the minor, and a really tough out Magomed Ankalaev. This is the perfect fight. It's a show me something fight in this men's light heavyweight division. Not like you really have many women's fights in this division. This should be a great one because for Magomed Ankalaev, you know how good the defensive wrestling is, but you know exactly how precise of a striker he is. We talked about that in the intro to the entire card. The fact that Ankalaev picks his shots, he's a very cerebral fighter, and the only mistake that we've really seen him make was his only loss to Paul Craig in the dying seconds of that fight that he was winning. So for Magomed Ankalaev, you look at the wins. Obviously, you have Max Grishin that we talked about earlier on this card. But since the Paul Craig fight, he's just continued to win in impressive fashion. He beat Marcin Prachnio, who's a winner in the UFC nowadays. He beat Klidson Abreu. That's a really telling fight. He beat Dalcha Lungiambula, where... Listen, Dalcha in his last fight fought a Dalcha fight where he actually took Marcus Perez down. But in that fight, Dalcha decided he was going to strike. The front kick knocked him out, and everybody in New Mexico went nuts. Then he fought Iwan Kutsalaba, knocked him out. And if that wasn't enough, he knocked him out again in more impressive fashion. So he comes into this fight against the minor. And Matt, for Nikita Krylov, I've been talking about this guy in his absence more than I think anybody's talked about him.
Too much.
Ukraine, stand up, because in his first run in the UFC, listen, he's had 2 fights against OSP. One he got Von Flewed, one he submitted OSP. And then if you look at the other fights, well, he fights Soa Paleli in his debut at heavyweight when he was 21 years old and he got knocked out in the 3rd round. He came out and knocked out Walt Harris in 25 seconds at heavyweight. Then he loses to OSP, fights Cody Donovan, Stanislav Netkov, Marcus Rogerio de Lima, submits him. He submits Francimar Barros. He finishes Ed Herman in a huge poster highlight reel knockout. And then he gets
Even in 2016, though, Ed Herman was like 41 years old.
Yeah, I mean, that was a pretty good pay-per-view, UFC 201, Lawler Woodley. And then he loses to Misha Serkinov, and that was like the Canadians' rise to fame. Now they're both kind of working, in unison to take down that division. So he leaves. And then he picks up huge wins in fight nights globally. He wins 4 fights in a row in ways you would hope he would win fights,
and I
right?
think that's the really important fact that we have to bring up about these.
So he beats Stepan Bakevich, he beats Mauro Perak, he beats Emmanuel Newton and Fabio Maldonado, and then he comes back and fights your now champion, Jan Blachowicz. And listen, the reason why I say Jan Blachowicz is a Swiss Army knife, well, it's because of a lot of his fights, but pretty much the fight against Nikita Krylov. He looked amazing in that fight. He could pretty much do whatever he needed to do. Krylov bounces back, fights with Vince St. Preux. About a year later, or thereabouts, it was almost a year, and finishes with Vince St. Preux by rear naked choke. Like, how crazy is that you come back after all this time and you beat the guy that you lost to Von Flue? Then you fight Glover Teixeira, loses split decision. I'm sure I'll talk about that later. And then he dominated Johnny Walker. So it's kind of a tale of two Krylovs where I have to say this. Every fight before Teixeira and Walker was a finish. And those last 2 were the first decision fights in his life. And you watch the Teixeira fight, and it was a close one. Again, split decision. We both scored it for Teixeira the entire fight. I had it 30-27 Teixeira. He cracked Teixeira. He had him bleeding. He had him in bad positions. And when Teixeira had him totally laid out, he had the hooks in. He was in back mount. Krylov was able to get out of that and then get into a submission position himself. He's very, very adept on the ground. He's a guy that's trained out of Tiger Muay Thai in his life, out of American Top Team. We've seen him kind of cross-train all over the place. I love Nikita Krylov for the parts and parcels, and that's why this is more interesting than the votes, than the stats, than the odds. I think this is such a great fight.
It really is, and I love the way that you set this up, because here's the thing. Nikita Krylov on his best day probably could be a top 5 fighter in the UFC. Here's the problem. Nikita Krylov on his worst day could probably lose on Contender Series, and that's the wild thing. Like, that's the 2 different fighters that we're talking about right now, and here's the thing about Nikita Krylov's grappling. Offensively, he is a phenomenal grappler. Defensively, he does leave quite a bit to be desired. Now, I understand Jan Blachowicz, he's your champ, he's this phenomenal fighter, and he is good at everything. But Jan Blachowicz, the first thing you think about him is not his grappling. I understand he does have a black belt, and that fight he looked phenomenal in. But Nikita Krylov's grappling did not look phenomenal in that fight. And just the thing about Nikita that I don't really enjoy is he does have trouble creating space on the ground. He's good in scrambles. If you are really heavy on top, he can sort of initiate some scrambles. But if you're a guy who does create space, and it's weird because normally it's the opposite. If you're fighting Tony Ferguson, the last thing you would want to do is create space in his guard because he's going to lock up a triangle. With Krylov, if you can create space, you can actually ground and pound him from not a safe position by any means, but he's much more of an arm triangle guy than he is a leg triangle guy. If you sit in his guard, not that you're safe by any means, but you can get some damage off. And here's the thing. I don't think this fight's going to be on the ground very often. Like, if Magomed Ankalaev's going for takedowns on Nikita Krylov, I don't think that is his best path to victory. Because let's say Krylov does get a sweep and is able to get on top of Ankalaev. He's going to elbow him into the ground and quite possibly arm triangle him. But for Ankalaev, you talked a little bit about his defensive grappling at the start of this. He is so hard to take down, and he is a great example of a guy who, yes, he's big, and we talk about this a lot more with, some of the lighter weight classes. You talk about it with Caitlin Chukagian. He's a good example of a fighter who uses their footwork to defend the takedown before the takedown even comes to them. And again, it's one of those weird X factors that you might not always be looking for, but Magomed Ankalaev, he's massive, but he does move his feet quite a bit, and he uses them in a defensive and offensive way. And I look at that second Cutelaba fight, because, yeah, the first one was a little weird. The pullback straight that he hits Cutelaba with was beautiful. The fact that Ankalaev, he does have very good body movement, he's a good judge of distance. When Cutelaba throws that massive hook and Ankalaev slips just out of the way of it and cracks him with one shot, you can just tell what high-level striker Ankalaev is. And even his kicks, like we talk about Nikita Krylov's head kicks against Ed Herman and Walt Harris, Magomed Ankalaev can get the feet up there too, and that's what makes this fight really fun. Goodness, that was tough for me to get out. Not a lot of light heavyweights can throw head kicks, and we're dealing with 2 who do them quite often, so I'm really excited for this fight. It can go both ways, and I'm curious to get your point of view on this. Who would you like to see both guys fight next? Because right now in light heavyweight, to me, there's a big separation between just ranked light heavyweights and the elite of the division. Because we talk about the elite, you have your Jan Blachowicz, you have the Glover Teixeiras. It's a bit of an aging division. These are 2 younger guys, if you will, who haven't fought the upper echelons next. So I'm just curious as to who would you like to see these guys go to next?
I mean, Nikita Krylov right now is ranked 8th, and you have Magomed Ankalaev at 11. If Krylov wins, well, I'd love to see one of 2 things. You already have Prohaska and Reyes matched up. Maybe the loser of that fight is who Krylov gets For Magomed Ankalaev, if he wins this fight, Anthony Smith or Volkan Oezdemir. And
I like those.
if you look at Krylov, well, he was already matched up to take on Volkan Oezdemir back in the fall into winter. A knee injury was the reason why Volkan pulled out of that fight. We get this. For Ankalaev, I'd like to see him tested against the Smiths. Now, Anthony Smith, Krylov would be a fun fight too. I think you're really matching fire with fire. You have a little bit more output in the range he strikes out of Smith. You have the in-tight power out of Krylov, and then the fact that, hey, he could knock your lights out or submit you. So it's a very, very good fight. Again, this is really difficult for me. I've had a few where, like, Angela Hill, 9 times out of 10, you're beating Ashley Yoder. There's a few fights, Maeda Buena Silva over Montana De La Rosa. Yeah, Maeda Buena Silva's going to win. This one's tricky, and listen, it sounds like I'm on the fence. It sounds like I'm on the fence because I am. I look at the odds here. Krylov open a plus 205 underdog. He's a plus 266. For Ankalaev, he opened a minus 240. He's now at a minus 346. I mean, Nikita Krylov, like, it's tricky. Here's the thing, though. The distance management of Magomed Ankalaev, I don't know. There's very few people in MMA that have better distance management than this guy. The other thing about Nikita Krylov, he has a great training partner that almost emulates his style at American Top Team, who's also Ukrainian. And this sounds like a poor comparison, but the guy's in his friggin' corner and they're pals, Yaroslav Amosov. And to have a guy like that to try and break down the style of a guy like Ankalaev, we've seen Amosov take on strikers. We've seen him out-wrestle wrestlers. Ed Ruth, I'm looking at you. So for a guy like Nikita Krylov, he has the style and a guy that he can train with that can kind of emulate a lot of the guys that he's going to be taking on in the UFC. Ankalaev's a tough test, though.
He is, and here's the key for Nikita Krylov. He needs respect in the striking early. He can't just go out there and try to work behind his jab and go for those long-distance takedown attempts, because that's the thing for Krylov. He's not a wrestler per se, and we talk about distance management. We have to bring it up for Krylov. The way that you know Ankalaev is good at judging distances, when he slips a punch, it's not like he's moving his whole body out of the way. He moves just far enough out of it, so he's still in position to counter. For Krylov, when he does go for his takedowns, he shoots from a very long ways away. He's not a guy who will throw 2 jabs, get some momentum behind him, and then shoot into one. He will just sort of shoot from the center of the cage. And again, it's not like Ankalaev is going to guillotine him or anything, but when you telegraph your shots by that much, a guy with really good footwork should be able to get out of there. So I'm going to say Ankalaev. I wouldn't be surprised even with a stoppage win. And here's the thing. I think Ankalaev is going to be in the top 5 for 205. Maybe that's just a criticism against 205 and where it is as a division. Or maybe you're like me and you think Magomed Ankalaev really does have a high ceiling. But I think this is going to be the first sort of elite win on his resume. Or at least the first noticeable name where you're like, wow, he beat Nikita Krylov. Like, he can really go far in this division. I like Ankalaev in this, but I agree it's a super fun fight.
Nikita Krylov, if you look at the top 15 of the UFC's light heavyweight division, you've got Jamal Hill, Paul Craig, Ryan Spann, Jim Crute, Ankalaev, Serkinov, Walker, Krylov, Oezdemir, Smith, Prohaska, Rakic, Reyes, Santos, Teixeira, and then Blachowicz, and then John Jones maybe, and then Israel Adesanya. I think, honest to goodness, the most slept-on name there is Nikita Krylov, because he could fight and nobody would pay attention. He's in this co-main event this weekend. Who's talking about Nikita Krylov? Me?
So here's the thing. I'm going to shout him out because we already have. One of my best friends, Tim Rose, loves Alexander Volkov. Fun fact, his 2 favorite fighters in the world are Alexander Volkov and Nikita Krylov. So talk some sense into that, man.
Good job, Tim. I look at this one, and I like all of the parts of Krylov's game, and if he brings it all together, if he's able to put together the wrestling that we saw him have against Johnny Walker, well, Johnny Walker is the least technical striker you see out there. The guy wings chances. He was training out of TriStar. He trains out of Tiger Muay Thai. He trains out of Russia. He trains out of Ireland. He's all over the place, and it's pretty much always the same thing that you get out of him. For Ankalaev, he's incredibly technical, 85% takedown defense in the UFC, and I just threw in an Easter egg at the start of this. If Klidson Abreu went for 5 takedown attempts and couldn't get any of them against Ankalaev, I think Krylov's a better wrestler and grappler than Abreu, but that's Abreu's bread and butter. If Ankalaev can do well against all of that, if his only loss is a momentary mistake or lapse in judgment against Paul Craig, I think he's going to be able to get the win. He took down Dalchalun Jambula and didn't really have any big issues with it. I like Magomed Ankalaev in this fight, but this is another one like your co-main event last weekend. If I close my eyes, miss this fight, woke up the next day, and Derek Lewis knocked out Curtis Blades, like Krylov was able to finish Ankalaev, I wouldn't be surprised in the least. So I love this fight for all it's worth. I'm going Ankalaev. You're going Ankalaev. 100%. Love it. Love the card and a great main event. We have Jairzinho Rozenstruik taking on Le Bon Gamin Ciryl Gane. It should be a great fight. Keep locked in with Fighting and Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it. If this is your first time tuning in with Fight Night Picks, hey, we appreciate it. Toss the like and the sub, as you always need to say, at Craig Allen FNP on Twitter and Instagram, at Matt Allen FNP. We don't normally get into the formalities, but I do that to say this. We are a pro Ciryl Gane show, but we are also a pro Jairzinho Rozenstruik show, and we've been pumping these guys' tires since UFC debuts, but before UFC debuts. And I hate to say the tire pump, but for Ciryl Gane, this guy destroyed Canada. Like, absolutely destroyed hopes and dreams of fighters in Canada. And if you look at the way that he put on the pressure to Adam Dykes, so that's a fight that I go back to, a TKO, like that kind of ruined Adam Dykes' career. He comes into the UFC and just continues to wreck house. He beats Rafael Pessoa. He beats Don'Tale Mace. He beats Tanner Boser, Canadian. And he beats Junior Dos Santos in a fight where, you know, Junior's got the power and he's got the boxing.
Oh,
and
back of my
Ciryl
head.
just in and out. Goes in for the kill. Again, did he ruin the Instagram game of Junior Dos Santos? Well, from then until now, yes, he did. Ciryl Gane is such a multifaceted martial artist. We've seen the takedowns. We've seen the submissions. We've seen the striking. You know how good his kickboxing is. But how good of a kickboxer is Jairzinho Rozenstruik? And how good is it translated into MMA? Because I remember the thing on him when he came into the UFC. Well, he's 76-6 in kickboxing.
Whack.
How's that going to translate into MMA? Beats Alan Crowder, beats Andrei Arlovsky, beats Alistair Overeem, loses to Francis Ngannou, beats Junior Dos Santos. For Jairzinho Rozenstruik, the big thing for him is not, well, you beat Alan Crowder and you beat an old Andrei Arlovsky. I mean, Tom Aspinall could do that too. I think Tom Aspinall's great. That's where I'm going with all this. But for Jairzinho, it was a fight against Alistair Overeem. I mean, he got the brakes pumped right out of him in that whole fight.
They're terrible.
Right until the end. He pulled a Derek Lewis. Right until the end, whoop-bam, and then he's able to get the win, whoop-bosh, as the waves go. And he finishes Alistair Overeem, sets himself up for Francis Ngannou, gets pushed up against the cage, and Ngannou goes full windmill, knocks him out. It's going to happen. But he doesn't, like, stay away. That fight was 9 months ago. And then, like, 3 months later, it's like, wow, this is way too soon to be fighting Junior Dos Santos. And he wasn't trigger shy. And he goes in there and finishes JDS too. So for both of these guys, you both finished JDS. You're at the top of this heavyweight division that now Blades is lost, Lewis is won. Does the winner get Derek Lewis?
It's
John
interesting.
Jones?
You don't really know, and this is the fun thing about heavyweight, and John Franklin had kind of mentioned it last night on the recap show. Make sure you check that one out. But there's a lot of fighters right now, and especially in heavyweight, where it just felt like the bottom of heavyweight fell out from under it. Like, there's all these sort of legends, if you will, even the Overeems. Blade's not a legend, but there's just all these guys in the top 5 and the top 10 who they're starting to age out or they're starting to lose. And there's a ton of really exciting young talent moving up. And I'm going to include Jairzinho in that young talent because I do think 32, kind of bordering on 33, is still fairly young for heavyweights. And same thing for Ciryl Gane. Like, he's younger than 31. He is still in his early 30s. As a heavyweight, you still have 10 good years ahead of you. Like, this is the start of your career. And that's what's so fun about both of these guys because I really do think I don't care if Ciryl Gane beats Jairzinho this weekend. I don't care if Jairzinho beats Ciryl Gane this weekend. I do, don't get me wrong, but I still think both of these guys can beat 9 of the top 15 guys out there. Like, I really think that the ceiling's going to be around for these guys. You're not going to see the end of Ciryl Gane if he loses to Jairzinho, and same thing vice versa.
How exciting is it to be an MMA fan right now where heavyweight, that's where the 35 and over club. You have Ciryl Gane, Rozenstruik, Aspinall, Dawkins, Boser. I can keep going. And these fighters aren't losing fights. Now, well, Boser has, but he's still around. So there's these younger generation of heavyweights that are coming in with more improved skill sets because it used to be Brock Lesnar had the wrestling. Frank Mir had the jiu-jitsu. Andrei Arlovsky's a good striker. Like, everybody was kind of good at one thing. Everybody's coming in here with good skill sets. Rozenstruik's a good striker, but his takedown defense is terrible.
So what I was going to say was, we're seeing a lot more well-rounded and more modern mixed martial artists now at heavyweight. Because, it was the old... You basically said exactly what I was going to say. So, Jairzinho Rozenstruik, I think, is the more powerful of these two athletes. And it's weird because Ciryl Gane, yes, a lot of his wins are by TKO. And then you look and you're like, well, no, they're not. He actually has a pretty developed ground game as well. But I really do think you have to take into consideration the guys who he was submitting in the UFC. Beating guys like Don'Tale Mace on the ground, yes, it's a good win, but I don't think he's going to be winning against the elite by submission. We're not going to see Ciryl Gane go to his ground game often. When he does fight the Curtis Blades of the world, when he does fight those upper echelon guys, we're going to see a lot more of his technical kickboxing, which honestly for Gane is probably the best thing for him. He is in that weird category too, where you look at him and you're like, oh damn, he must be weighing in at the upper echelon of heavyweight. Not really. He is only about 250 pounds, and you're like, oh, 250. He moves like a light heavyweight, and that's the important thing. Ciryl Gane has the range of motion of someone a lot lighter than himself.
We gotta focus on this too, and I know somebody's gonna throw it out there in the comments, so I'm gonna be proactive. A lot of people say Jairzinho Rozenstruik is 6'2". I have to pull out the tape measure to see it because the UFC have him listed as 6'4". They have Gane listed as 6'4". Let's see them on weigh-in day to see where they are. But a lot of people say, oh, it's 6'2", it's 6'3" for Rozenstruik. Those are the numbers that I'm going off, just what I'm provided. But you're right. For Ciryl Gane coming in his last fight, 247.5. For Rozenstruik, 254. So you're not like, again, a Derek Lewis to 263. You're not like Greg Hardy to 265. Maybe we weigh in with the towel. Like, these guys are fit, in shape, and we don't really have to worry so much about the weight cut. For Rozenstruik and Suriname, holy smokes, is this guy throwing a heater of a superstar rise. And even with the loss to Ngannou, he's still a superstar. For Gane and French MMA, Fernand Lopez in the corner. You haven't had Francis Ngannou, who looks like he didn't leave on good terms. You still have Nasruddin Imavov that lost last weekend, but no shame, no shame. And they have a lot of great prospects as well. But Ciryl Gane in that camp there, they've really kind of figured it out. You talked about the Dontel Mace fight. You go back and watch that. Well, Ciryl Gane's having success on the feet. I would hope he would. But Dontel Mace is a classically trained boxer. You have success there, you take him down. And then, close to the end of a round, it's like, hey, we're going to go for a heel hook and we're going to get it. And I love it out of him. And then you look at the other fights that he has. The biggest fight for me, and I know this might sound silly because of his last fight, but throw that one out and focus on the Felipe Lins fight. Tanner Boser is a good fighter. The fight that Ciryl Gane had against Tanner Boser, you had to worry about, well, Boser's going to throw a lot of leg kicks. He's going to throw a lot of in and out and a lot of volume. Gane was able to match that and beat him in that game. And then he went out there and fought Junior Dos Santos, downloaded the game plan, and then maybe it took him a little bit longer than you would hope, but he finished him in impressive fashion. So for Gane, hasn't lost a fight yet as a pro. For Rozenstruik, came back, had that huge win. And again, you knock out Alan Crowder, you knock out Arlovsky, you knock out Overeem in the dying seconds of a 5-round fight. You like the experience from Rozenstruik.
I really do, and I like a lot about Rozenstruik in this fight, and this is kind of fun, because it's not that often. Let's just be honest. You like Ciryl Gane in this fight. I like Jairzinho in this fight.
I've never said that.
But I can see Ciryl Gane winning in a lot of ways. Like, this fight, I don't want to say it's the epitome of heavyweight MMA, because it is so 50-50, but these are two really well-rounded heavyweight fighters who can win this fight a lot of different ways, and the thing that worries me about Ciryl Gane is I know he has really good cardio, especially for the size of him, and it's weird. Again, we talk about someone who is built like him, who does weigh 250 pounds, super light on his feet, and that's what you really like to see, because again, you look at the heavyweight division, and even Jairzinho, who I would say is one of the better pure strikers in the division, he's more that brooding force. He is sort of flat-footed. He's not going to be jumping back and forth like a Ciryl Gane will, and what Ciryl Gane... The only thing that I'm worried for Gane in this fight is if he stays in the pocket a little bit too long. Because Ciryl Gane's never fought a fighter who's really made him go through adversity in the UFC yet. Every single one of his fights, yes, the Boser fight went to decision, but let's be honest, Ciryl Gane for the most part was in control of that whole entire fight. Jairzinho's going to crack him, though. And it's not like I think Ciryl Gane... Remember how people said this about Khabib for the longest time? They're like, oh, when he gets cut, what if he just goes crazy? It's never happened before. Listen, Ciryl Gane's not going to eat a clean shot and lose his mind and become a different fighter. But it is a talking point. Again, Jairzinho's fought better fighters than Ciryl, even though he hasn't always beat them. Francis is a better fighter. It's just he didn't win that fight. Ciryl Gane, this is his big chance. And I think they're matching him up with a good stylistic matchup for him. When I look at that top 5, I do think the best fight for Gane right now is Jairzinho. If Jairzinho cracks him, he's going to go to sleep. But if he is able to get this fight to the ground, not that I think, like I mentioned, Gane's going to use his ground game a lot against the elite, but this is the best fighter to take down in the top 5. And we can talk about, let's say, Overeem. He's got a good ground game. I don't really consider him elite anymore, but when you do look at the elite of the division, Junior Santos can't really take a punch anymore. Now you're fighting Jairzinho, who is an extremely well-rounded striker and a really good fighter, don't get me wrong, but he doesn't have much of a ground game, and that at least is a wrinkle that we've seen from Ciryl Gane so far in his UFC career.
And that's the thing. I mean, I look at this, and I omitted, on purpose, the first fight that Rozenstruik had in the UFC. Well, he knocked out that guy that's fighting with random promotions now, Junior Albini, and Albini took him down a couple times. Overeem took him down a couple times. But again, Overeem was winning that fight until 4:56 of the last round. He was cruising to a win in that fight until he lost. For Rozenstruik, the weird thing is, if you look at that Overeem fight and all the fights, and this is a problem, If you look at certain fighters on this card, their strike differentials are weird. Maida Buena Silva is a perfect example because she got outstruck by Marina Moroz, and then in every other fight, they've ended very quickly. So you look at Jairzinho Rozenstruik, if you just want numbers on a page, his strike differential is a decent negative, it's a positive, 0.94. But the difference between his accuracy and his defense, 51% accuracy, 36% defense, he's getting hit, but he's winning fights, and he's winning them quickly. Little asterisk is that Overeem fight, where Overeem totally outlanded him until right at the end. Now, if you look in terms of total strikes, again, Rozenstruik has him, on total strikes, and that's it, but the significant strikes were for Overeem. Unfortunately, it was one major significant strike that busted him up, and then the flurry from Rozenstruik in that one. For me, though, that's it. The takedown defense has been somewhat tested, but not by Crowder, not by Arlovsky, not by Ngannou, and not by Dos Santos, because Biggie Boy just struck with them and knocked out the majority of those guys. I like the takedowns of Gane. I like the total overall game of Gane. I like the clinch positions for Gane. For Rozenstruik, his best opportunity is at distance. Gane switches stances very well too, and he invests in the kicks. I would like to see more low kicks out of Rozenstruik, but the thing is, he throws a lot of high kicks.
He does.
You like.
And exactly, that's what I was going to lead into. It's going to be weird, because heavyweights don't throw kicks. Let's just be honest. Most heavyweights are sort of that wrestle boxer. A lot of them throw leg kicks, but you don't see many head kicks in the heavyweight division. We've got two guys who can get their feet up there quick, and this will probably be a primary kickboxing fight, and that is kind of why I'm leaning Jairzinho, if I'm being honest. I understand he's a big underdog, but for me, I think Ciryl Gane's camp knows what he's good at. He's a phenomenal striker. He's got really good cardio. He's got very fast hands. I don't think they're going into this fight thinking, okay, let's really work our wrestling when we do look at the other top fives, because from this point on, if you beat Jairzinho Rozenstruik, you're not getting an easy fight from here on out. You're fighting the Volkovs of the world. You're fighting all those upper echelon elite guys. And I'll be honest, I think Ciryl Gane will get there one day, but I do think he is going to have to suffer a loss and really work on his game. And I don't mean that as I don't like Ciryl Gane's game. I just think pretty much everyone needs to go through that one bout of adversity and then finally make their way back. I'm going to pick Jairzinho ever so slightly. I like his power. I like the fact that he can carry his power late, and that's something I know as a fact.
Yep.
But again, if Ciryl Gane does have success with the takedowns early, I expect to just continue going that way as the fight progresses. So I like the power and the hand speed of Rozenstruik. I can admit Gane probably has the more complete game out of the two, but I see this mainly being a striking match. I'm so excited for this main event, though. I'm more excited for this than I was for Blades Lewis. This is my favorite of the last three heavyweight main events that we've had.
Oh, I mean, this is one of the best heavyweight fights that we've had recently. We had Aspinall Arlovsky, we had Dawkins taking on Oleinik, and then we had that fight in the main event. The trouble for Rozenstruik, before I give my pick, which Matt tipped my hand, rude. Rozenstruik's at 3. Do you fight Blades, who's coming off a loss? Do you fight the winner or the loser of Miocic and Gane? You're in a weird spot if you're Rozenstruik because of how top-heavy this division is. I would love to see the winner fight John Jones. I think that's not crazy because Jones is going to be inserted in here, and he's probably going to get the winner of the title fight, and then
Does the winner fight Volkov then, just because he did beat Overeem last week?
Maybe Gane fights Volkov if he wins. I'd say that's probably it. So for me, I like Gane. I like the complete game. If we look at the odds, Matt, again, I was kind of surprised when I was doing my research for this one because Ciryl Gane opened to -300. He's now -272. So the money is coming in on Rozenstruik, who opened a +250. He's now at a +216. If we have a look at the votes on Tapology, 868, 72% Gane, 51% by knockout for him, 22% by submission, 22% by decision. The 28% that have Rozenstruik to win, 92% by knockout. They do not have Biggie Boy really winning by any other margin. I've got Gane to win this fight. Listen, again, not the gambling guy, so I'm not going to talk about knockout, submission, round, all that. I'm just taking Gane for what it's worth. I think he's going to get the win here. Keep the O. You've got Biggie Boy in this one.
This is not a good example, but I think it is important. And go back to the Francis fight. And again, that's the fight that you don't want to talk about at all. But just remember, I know Jairzinho wasn't able to stop Francis, but think about that flurry. When Francis does come in wild, Jairzinho does the perfect thing you're supposed to do. He keeps everything down the center. Now, yes, he does back straight up. He doesn't back out an angle.
Just remember what Overeem did in their last fight.
But still, he's moving straight backwards, and he does land shots as he's moving backwards. The fact that Jairzinho can fight moving backwards and forwards, I think, is a really big X factor in this. Again, if Ciryl Gane wins, I'm finally on board. You're the conductor of the train. I'll hop on if he is able to win this one. But for me, I think Jairzinho is going to be able to win. But yeah, the winner of this should probably fight Volkov, I would say, and then hopefully the winner of that gets a title shot eventually. But right now, heavyweights, it's such a logjam that who knows what's going to happen.
Matt, I love this fight. We're split on the picks, but overall, with me going Gane and you going Rozenstruik, it sets us up great for question mark kicks. We've been different on some of these picks, but we sit in different rooms and write our notes in different spots, and we can be different on some of these picks. And hey, that's all the more fun about it. Let us know down below in the comments section who you're going with in this fight, but for the entire card, give us your picks for fight of the night. You can find some of the different odds and ends in the community tab on YouTube. As always, Twitter and Instagram at Fight Night Picks is the channel, but at Craig Allen FMP, at Matt Allen FMP. Hopefully you're enjoying the fights. And overall, Matt, it should be a great week. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. As we always say, let's get into it.